Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Christy Sheets. Christy was born in 1974 in Decatur, Alabama, a city with a population of around 55,000. She was raised by her mother, Rebecca, a nurse who was a single parent. She attended Austin High School but did not graduate. At school, she was a member of a popular, exclusive teenage clique. It was during this time that she met Jason Sheets, who became the love of her life. Although they were both young when they met, they felt that they would be together forever. Jason Sheets was born in Lawrence County, Alabama, and graduated from East Lawrence High School in Trinity, just 15 minutes from Christy's home. He was an exceptional baseball player, very intelligent, and well-liked. Over time, Jason and Christy became the perfect couple. They married in the mid-90s and later moved to Fort Worth, a city in north-central Texas. There they welcomed two beautiful daughters, Taylor, born in 1994, and Madison, born in 1999. When their eldest daughter, Taylor, was in second grade, the family moved to Fulshear, a quiet suburb in Texas in the southern United States. They were a middle-class family, thanks in large part to Jason's income as a technology consultant at an oil and gas company in Houston. He graduated in 1993 with a degree in mathematics and began his career as a software developer at various companies. Christy, on the other hand, did not have a stable job. She worked as an executive assistant and vice president at a transportation company, and also as a stylist in a beauty salon. In 2015, she took a job as a receptionist at a laser hair removal clinic in Houston. John Hollis, the clinic manager and Christy's boss, sometimes viewed her as a problem employee, with an unstable personality. Christy has an easy-to-listen Southern accent, which often brings a sense of comfort to customers. However, when there were no customers, she would become different and somewhat sad. Eventually, her boss decided to fire her, which caused her to go through a difficult and painful period. As for Christy and Jason's daughters, they are Madison and Taylor. The eldest, Taylor, is a kind and thoughtful young girl. She has many friends and is trusted by those around her. One friend called her a beautiful soul, highlighting her sweetness and kindness. Taylor often babysat for neighbors and even tutored their children in various subjects. For 6 months, she worked at a preschool, where everyone recognized her natural talent for connecting with kids. During this time, she also taught the boys sign language, which she had learned independently. Besides, Taylor is also a talented and creative artist with a great passion for art. She started dating Juan Sebastian in 2011, and the two got engaged in 2013. Meanwhile, Madison, Taylor's younger sister, is a cheerful and positive girl who always brings joy to everyone around her. Since the age of 14, Madison has been a nanny in her spare time. Taylor and Madison had a wonderful time together. They never fought and truly loved each other. Their father, Jason, also cherished his daughters, and they spent a lot of time together. Christy, their mother, adored her daughters. Madison and Taylor, who were everything to her, they were her reason for living. Christy spoke proudly about her girls, frequently sharing their photos on social media as a testament to her love. 2 years earlier, on Mother's Day in 2013, Taylor shared a heartfelt tribute to her mom, Christy, on Facebook. She praised her mother for being incredibly generous, always prioritizing her family without expecting anything in return. Additionally, she described her mother as one of the strongest people she knows, having faced many challenges in life, but always showing love and devotion to her daughter. However, beneath that happy exterior, Christy is struggling with emotional problems. In 2012, Christy lost her grandfather, who had been her main support and mentor, marking the beginning of her emotional decline. Just 2 months later, Christy's mother passed away, leading her to battle severe depression. This condition became so overwhelming that she attempted to end her life 3 times by taking large doses of medication and began drinking excessively. Over time, Christy required ongoing treatment for depression and anxiety, spending the next 4 years in 3 different private psychiatric hospitals. Her life became chaotic, and she even lived separately in a rented apartment away from her family. For Christy, her husband Jason is not only her greatest love, but also her rock during difficult times. Unfortunately, their relationship began to deteriorate. Since 2012, they faced marital issues due to Christy's emotional struggles, leading to multiple breakups. In 2016, Jason decided to move out, believing that divorce was the only solution. By this point, it was clear that the situation in their family was not good. Between 2012 and 2016, police visited their home at least 14 times, due to family disputes and requests for assistance. Following these incidents, a specialized police team was assigned to monitor the family. Additionally, the Sheriff's Department's crisis management team intervened. In one 911 call in November 2015, someone requested police assistance to check on their home, as they had heard that the occupants might be intoxicated. However, it turned out that the issue was a verbal argument between Jason and Christy, with no physical violence involved. An important part of Christy's personality was her strong support for the right to bear arms. Although she applied for a weapon license, the state denied her request due to her mental health history. Nevertheless, she inherited a weapon from her maternal grandfather. The presence of weapons in the house made Taylor feel uneasy. She confided in a childhood friend that it caused her anxiety, especially given her mother, Christy's mental health issues. On Friday, June 24, 2016, Jason celebrated his 45th birthday. He spent most of the day with one of his daughters and communicated with Christy about the next step in their relationship. He was considering officially ending the relationship. When he got home, he found Christy sitting in the backyard and informed her that he had decided to file for divorce. Christy had difficulty accepting that her life would never be the same again, and no one could predict what would happen next. Jason went to the other side of the house, and then Christy called a family meeting. He thought this meeting would be to announce their divorce. Around 5 p.m., Jason and Christy started arguing again as everyone gathered in the main room. Jason could no longer hold back and finally expressed what had been on his mind. He wanted a divorce. He told Christy that this would be the last birthday he would let her ruin. The tension escalated. The argument intensified because Christy was angry with Taylor for supporting their divorce. Christy decided to punish Taylor by forbidding her from seeing her boyfriend, even though they were supposed to get married the following Monday. Jason disagreed with Christy, finding it unreasonable to punish Taylor. As soon as the situation escalated, Christy suddenly grabbed her maternal grandfather's weapon from under the couch cushion and pointed it at Jason. She accused Jason of forcing her to do the act and insisted he should suffer the consequences. Jason was extremely scared and begged her not to take action. Amidst her chaotic emotions, Madison managed to call 911 for assistance. Meanwhile, Jason desperately begs Christy not to pull the trigger, urging her to think of their daughter. He assured her they would do anything she wanted, but Christy, clearly agitated, replied that it was too late. During the call to emergency services, screams could be heard from Jason and their daughters. One daughter cried out, "Please don't do this. Forgive them. Don't do it." But her pleas were ignored by her mother, Christy. As Jason tried to calm Christy, she began attacking Madison and Taylor. By that time, the police were already en route. Jason ran behind the couch, trying to help his daughters escape, but it was too late. Christy attacked Madison in the neck. As Madison attempted to flee out the front door, she lost consciousness and died from her injuries. Christy then pursued Taylor, who was also injured and trying to escape. In that moment, Taylor reached out to 911, struggling to explain the situation and mention her injury, but the dispatcher could only hear sounds of distress before the call abruptly ended. The neighbors were in shock at what was unfolding. One of them attempted to call 911 and explain the situation. The neighbor reported that 2 individuals had wounds from weapons and that a woman with a weapon was coming out of her house. Later, the neighbor stated that the people involved in the shooting lived next door and that he was trying to safeguard himself and his family because the armed woman was still outside. Christie then attacked Taylor again, who was lying in the middle of the street as neighbors watched in shock from their homes. At the same time, Jason ran to the end of the street, calling for help. Throughout the incident, Christie appeared calm and emotionless. In total, she inflicted 3 wounds on Taylor's head and back. At this point, the police arrived on the scene. They ordered Christie to surrender her weapon, but she refused. In response, one of the officers attacked her, ending her life. A helicopter transported the critically injured Taylor to Texas Medical Center, where she later died from her injuries. Jason was not attacked during the incident, but he was taken to a medical facility because he was in shock and unable to process what had happened. A few days later, Taylor and Madison were laid to rest at the Memorial Cemetery in Decaturina, Alabama. This tragic case has garnered significant attention in the United States, particularly after authorities released the emergency calls made by Taylor and Madison during the attack. Friends and family were shocked, as they viewed Christie and her children as a happy family without any apparent issues. Many questioned what could have driven Christie to commit such a horrific act, and why she would deliberately kill her own daughters. Jason was devastated by the loss of his daughters at the hands of his wife. A few days after the tragedy, he told the police that Christie seemed intent on making him suffer. Despite having the opportunity, she did not harm him. Jason believed she wanted him to live with the pain of her actions, which led him to conclude that her motive for killing their daughters was to inflict suffering on him. This suggested that Christie was determined to kill their daughters that day. Evidence supporting this theory includes her hiding the weapon between the sofa cushions, indicating she planned to gather the family and then use the weapon. A friend mentioned that she always sensed something would happen, but she never expected Christie to take such action, describing Christie as toxic to the family. Because people loved Madison and Taylor, their tragic fate caused pain for many. This case continues to shock people because despite Christie's emotional struggles, she had no history of violence or aggressive behavior. Almost a week after the attack, Jason shared a series of photos of his daughters, Madison and Taylor, on Facebook. In September 2016, Jason gave a television interview where he stated that the power of God helped him cope with the loss of his daughters. He expressed that he had nothing positive to say about Christie, as his love for her had faded long ago. Although he felt immense sadness, he spoke calmly about how he could never escape the memories of that day. The story of Christie's family is still heartbreaking to hear. It serves as another reminder of the underlying mental health issues, but no one could have predicted the outcome. Christie turned her deep love into hate, leading her to kill her own daughters. Her actions were meant to ensure that her husband would suffer a lifetime of painful memories. Truly horrifying. Lori K. Soares Hacking was born on December 31, 1976, and was adopted by Thelma and Iraldo Soares. They formerly lived in Fullerton, California. Iraldo is a Spanish and Portuguese teacher at Sunny Hills High School and a native of Piracicaba, Brazil. He met Thelma while they were both serving as missionaries for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Rio de Janeiro. Lori's parents divorced in 1987. Thelma and Lori moved to Orem, Utah the following year. In Orem, she attended Orem High School, where she was known for her organizational skills, determination, and vibrant personality. During high school, Lori met Mark Douglas Hacking. Their relationship quickly grew. They became a well-known couple, attending all the homecoming dances and proms together, appearing just like any other young couple in love. Mark, who was helpful and reliable, often spent time at Lori's house, assisting with errands, home repairs. This earned him a special place in Lori's family's hearts. Lori's brother jokingly felt jealous, as Mark received more attention from their mother and Lori than he did. However, Lori's family genuinely appreciated Mark's kindness and support. Lori and Mark's youthful romance blossomed into a strong relationship, leading to their marriage on August 7, 1999. By 2004, Lori was working as an assistant manager at a financial institution, while Mark, who had just graduated from the University of Utah, was preparing to start medical school at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Mark's decision to pursue medicine was expected, as he came from a well-educated family with several doctors, including his father and brothers, while another brother worked in government. In the summer of 2004, Lori and Mark planned to move to North Carolina. Lori, who was pregnant, was excited about the relocation, as was her mother, Thelma, who was eager to become a grandmother. Thelma hoped for a granddaughter with big curls like Lori's. On July 19, 2004, Lori, who was 27 years old and 5 months pregnant, suddenly disappeared. At around 5:15 a.m., she went for her usual jog at Memory Grove Park and City Creek Canyon before heading to work in Salt Lake City. When she did not return that afternoon, her boss contacted Mark. Concerned for her safety, Mark quickly called the police to report her missing. Mark arrived at Memory Grove Park at 10:07 a.m., aware that it was the last place Lori was supposed to be. He found her car in the parking lot, but the park was unusually quiet, making his heart race with fear. Patrol officers greeted him outside the park and updated detectives on Lori's disappearance. They feared the worst, thinking she might have fallen into the canyon, gotten injured, and become trapped in the thick woods. Given the situation, the patrol officers believed it was essential to involve homicide detectives. The steep canyon walls heightened their concern, as they worried that the pregnant woman might have been hurt and needed urgent help. Lori Hacking's mysterious disappearance shocked the community, leading to a flood of support from friends and family. Her husband, Mark Hacking, was visibly distraught as he appealed for help in locating his missing wife. His public requests for assistance caught the attention of various media outlets, and he eagerly spoke to any reporter asking about Lori, expressing his deep worry and asking for help in the search. Officers from the Salt Lake City Police Department are actively investigating the case and have organized a large-scale search at Memory Grove Park. They are seeking the help of at least 3,000 volunteers to assist in searching for Lori or any evidence that she may have been present in the area. Many homes are located along the path leading to Memory Grove Park, where Lori was reportedly last seen. The officers are thoroughly canvassing the area, looking for anyone who might have witnessed something unusual. Lori is easily recognizable with her distinctive bushy dark curls, and the officers believe residents would likely remember her. Their hopes were momentarily lifted when a woman claimed to have seen Lori near Memory Grove that morning, but she later retracted her statement. As the search for Lori continued, the Salt Lake City Police Department established a command post near the entrance of the park. Mark's brothers and Lori's mother arrived at the scene. One of Mark's brothers suggested checking a homeless encampment in the canyon, voicing concerns about the potential involvement of those living there in Lori's disappearance. The detectives understood the importance of exploring all avenues and decided to investigate the encampment. There are no suspicious signs here. They realized that uncovering the truth would be challenging and that every detail needed thorough examination. Detectives arrived at Mark and Lori Hacking's home. They were already aware that in many missing persons cases, the partner is often the primary suspect. They also considered the possibility that Lori might have had a romantic relationship with someone else, which could have played a role in her disappearance. The detectives asked Mark for permission to enter their apartment and to obtain a recent photograph of Lori for their missing person flyer. Mark agreed, allowing them to enter the apartment. After entering the residence, the detectives asked Mark for permission to do a quick search, which he agreed to. During the search, one detective found a red handbag that belonged to Lori. Inside the handbag was Lori's wallet, complete with her identification and credit cards. The detectives were puzzled as to why Lori would go to Memory Grove Park for exercise, leaving her car near the entrance but not taking her purse with her. Additionally, the detective spotted a large bouquet of flowers on the kitchen counter, which led her to believe that Mark had bought them for Lori as an apology. This detail raised her suspicion about potential issues in their marriage, as she recalled that husbands often give large bouquets to express remorse. While investigating the bathroom, the detective noted that it was exceptionally clean and had a strong smell of bleach, suggesting someone had recently scrubbed it with disinfectant. This finding intrigued the detective, as it indicated an effort to hide something. In the bedroom, she observed a set of sheets on the bed that looked brand new, with visible creases and no signs of having been washed. When she checked Lori's jewelry box, she noticed that Lori's wedding band was missing, which struck her as odd. The detective wondered why a happily married woman would not be wearing her wedding ring. Mark met YTH, a detective at the police department, for an interview. The detective asked him questions about his marriage, and Mark claimed that everything was fine. Given the growing evidence and suspicions against him, this statement seemed questionable. Mark mentioned that he and Lori were packing to move to North Carolina, where he would soon start medical school. This information caught the detective's attention, and she became curious about his intended specialty. When she asked, Mark surprised her by saying he would specialize in oncology. As the interview progressed, the detective closely observed Mark's behavior. He seemed to be crying, but they never saw any tears, which made them suspicious and led them to believe that he might be pretending. They felt deep inside that something terrible had happened to Lori, suspected Mark was involved, but they still hoped Lori was alive and could be saved. The detectives asked Mark for permission to search his red truck. While they searched the vehicle, Mark was present. On the seat, the detective found a receipt from a mattress company dated the same day Lori went missing. This raised questions. Why would Mark buy a new mattress on the day his pregnant wife disappeared? Determined to find more evidence, they returned to Mark's apartment and asked for his signature on a consent form that would allow a more thorough search. Mark agreed, giving the detectives permission to enter his home. Once inside, the detective confronted him with a receipt they had found. They also noticed a new mattress on Mark and Lori's bed. This finding prompted further questioning. The detective asked Mark about the mismatched mattress and box spring, suggesting it had been bought recently. Mark's reaction indicated that this struck a nerve. While continuing their search, the detectives made another discovery that heightened their suspicions. They found several knives on the nightstand next to Mark's bed. One knife was hidden in a sheath, and when they examined it, they noticed red stains on the blade, which they suspected were human blood. When questioned about it, Mark claimed he used the knife for hunting. When the detective found the knife, they stopped the consensual search of the house and called in a crime scene investigation team. They started working on getting a search warrant because they believed something serious had happened in Lori's home. While checking the area, detectives noticed a trash can in the parking lot, leading them to suspect that Mark had killed his wife and dumped her body in the trash. Around the same time, the night watch officer informed the police investigating Lori's disappearance that Mark had been seen running around naked at a local motel. This incident increased suspicions about Mark's involvement and added to the evidence suggesting he played a role in Lori's disappearance. When an officer arrived at the motel, he found Mark behaving oddly and completely naked. However, the officer observed that Mark had the presence of mind to put on his shoes before running around the parking lot, which made the officer suspect that Mark was pretending to act strangely. A person in an abnormal state would not even realize they were walking barefoot. That afternoon, a detective visited Mark at the hospital and was surprised to see that he showed no signs of emotional distress. Instead, he appeared relaxed and content, enjoying pizza and watching television. The detective began the interview by asking the same questions as before. Mark maintained that Lori had never returned home from her morning jog. During the interview, Douglas Hacking, Mark's father, was present and urged him to be truthful if he had done something wrong. However, Mark looked back at his father with a determined expression, insisting that he had not done anything. Douglas was confident in his son's honesty and believed him. While the investigation into Lori's disappearance was ongoing, detectives received information from officials at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. They informed the detectives that Mark Hacking, who was supposed to start an oncology program there, was not enrolled and that they had no record of him. They presented this information to Thelma, Lori's mother, hoping to clarify Mark's true intentions. Initially, Thelma refused to accept the detectives' claims, perceiving them as mere speculation. However, her disbelief wavered when the detectives revealed that Mark had never graduated from the University of Utah. This shocking revelation made Thelma reconsider past events, and she recalled signs that something was off. At Mark's supposed graduation ceremony, she remembered hearing him sick in the bathroom, which prevented him from attending the event. They believed that Mark's deception had finally caught up with him, which might have contributed to Lori's disappearance. On July 20, 2004, one day after Lori went missing, a store clerk from a nearby shop reported an important detail to the detectives. The clerk recalled that on the evening of July 18 at 9:45 p.m., Lori and Mark entered the store and bought a soda. The detectives reviewed the store's CCTV footage from that time and confirmed the clerk's story. The video showed Lori wearing green scrub-style pants and a tan shirt, along with Mark as they entered the store. This was believed to be the last confirmed sighting of Lori alive. The search for Lori lasted 3 days and involved hundreds of volunteers. Her mother, Thelma, made a heartfelt appeal to the public, urging anyone who might have Lori to release her, emphasizing the extreme heat in a canyon, which often exceeded 100 degrees in July. Despite the challenging conditions, the search efforts remained strong. Meanwhile, Mark was in the hospital recovering from a mental health crisis. His brothers, Scott and Lance, growing suspicious of his potential involvement in Lori's disappearance, confronted him again. On July 24, 2004, Mark eventually confessed to killing Lori. He explained that she had found out he was not actually a graduate of the University of Utah, where he claimed to be attending medical school in North Carolina. This revelation devastated Lori, making her feel betrayed. Before she could file for divorce, Mark took drastic action by shooting her and disposing of her body in a dumpster. After Mark admitted to his brothers, the search for Lori in the canyon shifted to the landfill. Nearly 30 officers were sent to the 10-acre landfill to search for her body. In the 2 days following the disposal, they had to sift through a massive amount of waste. First-degree murder charges were filed against Mark on August 9, 2004. The search for Lori was extensive and physically challenging, especially with the high temperatures. Many agencies and professionals worked together in this effort. They used cadaver dogs and equipment like earth movers to help find any evidence. These tools were essential in narrowing down the search area and uncovering important leads. On October 1, 2004, at 8:20 a.m., human remains were discovered in the landfill. This was a major breakthrough in the case, bringing hope for answers regarding Lori's disappearance. The remains were carefully examined and identified using dental records, confirming that they belonged to Lori. This information provided a clear conclusion to the search, offering some closure for her family. On April 15, 2005, Lori's husband, Mark, pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. He was sentenced on June 6, 2005, to 6 years to life in prison. The Utah State Board of Pardons later stated that he would not be eligible for parole until 2035. That means will face a minimum of 30 years in prison. Board Chairman Mike Sibbett emphasized that the hearing does not guarantee a release date. He stated that there were several aggravating factors in Hacking's case that merited a stay. He emphasized that Hacking obstructed justice by disposing of Lori's body and falsely claiming she was missing. In honor of Lori, her family chose to remove Mark Hacking's last name from her headstone. This decision aimed to celebrate Lori's memory and assert her independence in light of Mark's actions, emphasizing her individuality and the strength she showed throughout her life. A year after Mark was convicted of murdering his wife, Lori, it was revealed that he had been involved in illegal activities while in the Central Utah Correctional Facility in Gunnison, Utah. He was found to be selling personal items, such as autographed memorabilia and other prison-related items, on a website called Murder Auction. Initially, Mark denied the allegations, but later, after an investigation, he agreed to stop his online sales. This revelation caused public outrage and raised new concerns about the integrity of the prison system. Many people do not recognize that the person in front of them is actually dangerous rather than loving. Unfortunately, not everyone has the opportunity to correct their mistakes. History tends to repeat itself, including its darkest moments. In today's story, we will discuss a significant betrayal that led to one of the most brutal and senseless crimes in Alaska's history, driven by greed and foolishness. This tragic event took place in Anchorage, Alaska. Interestingly, although the overall crime rate in the U.S. has been declining, Anchorage is an exception, with violent crime rates being 60% higher than the national average. Statistics show that even women in this area commit violent crimes more frequently, usually targeting their loved ones. Cynthia Hoffman spent her entire life in Anchorage. Family and friends described her as a bright and kind girl working hard to achieve her American dream. She faced challenges due to a developmental delay, which made her school experience difficult. Nevertheless, Cynthia never gave up, consistently aimed for greater achievements. She graduated from high school, completed driving school, and secured a job at a diner. She cherished her friendships, particularly with her best friend Denali Bremer. The two had been friends since elementary school and had plans to go to college together. Although she aspired to attend college, those dreams were ultimately unfulfilled. Cynthia's parents were divorced, but she had good relationships with both her father, Timothy Hoffman, and her mother, who both supported her endeavors. On June 2, 2019, 19-year-old Cynthia missed a scheduled meeting with her father. Timothy, a construction worker, often brought Cynthia along on part-time jobs, where she helped him with minor tasks. In return, he paid her, teaching her the importance of hard work and saving money from a young age. Cynthia had assisted her father frequently for over a year, and they saw each other daily. On that particular day, she was expected to meet him after school. Her father had promised to pay her for past work when he was short on cash, so she was excited to go because it meant she would get paid double. She also mentioned that she needed money for a party that weekend. Cynthia texted her father to let him know she was at the park for a meeting and promised to return in about an hour. Timothy waited for her, but she never came back. He tried calling her phone and sending her messages, but she didn't respond. He thought it was possible she was just out with friends and lost track of time, so he hesitated to call the police. However, none of his messages were read, and his calls went unanswered throughout the day. Concerned about his daughter and her unexplained absence, he decided to contact the authorities. When Timothy arrived at the police station, he reported Cynthia as missing. The police took the case seriously and quickly began their investigation. They organized search teams, brought in volunteers. Timothy joined the search right away, driving around the city and asking people if they had seen his daughter. He showed them her photo, but despite his efforts all day, he couldn't find any useful information. From the beginning, he had a nagging feeling that something was wrong. Cynthia's behavior was unusual. She had never been gone for this long before, and she didn't have any mental health issues or a tendency to run away. She was naive, needed guidance. There had been no family conflicts or signs that she wanted to leave. In the days that followed, Timothy began to lose hope for a positive outcome. He started to fear that someone had lured his daughter to the park with harmful intentions, despite the ongoing search. The police initially thought Timothy might have more information, but he had a verified alibi during this time. Timothy stayed in touch with Cynthia's friends, particularly her best friend Denali, who had been in regular contact with Cynthia and was one of the last to see her. Denali expressed that she had no knowledge of Cynthia's whereabouts and hoped for her safe return. She requested updates if Timothy discovered any new information. Meanwhile, some school friends reported that they last saw Cynthia and Denali leaving together in a car, heading off in an unknown direction. This raised suspicions, as lying seemed unnecessary unless someone had something to conceal. When investigators looked into Cynthia's social media, they found that a person named Tyler had invited her for a ride, which she had accepted. This invitation coincided with the timing of her disappearance. With no new leads, detectives began tracking Cynthia's contacts leading up to her missing status. Who is Tyler? What was Cynthia doing, and where was she headed? Her classmates confirmed that she had planned to meet her father to help him with work and collect her payment. After the police spoke with Denali, she changed her story about Timothy. She admitted that after classes, she and Cynthia were walking to their cars when she dropped Cynthia off at the nearest city park. Following that, Cynthia sent her father a message updating him on her whereabouts and promised to see him later. However, after those messages, Cynthia's phone went silent. The search efforts then shifted from the city streets to the dense underbrush of the park. On June 4, 2019, just 2 days after her missing, Cynthia Hoffman was discovered dead. The 19-year-old's body was found on the banks of the Ekludna River, a popular tourist spot. Her hands were tied behind her back, and her mouth was taped shut. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head, inflicted from behind. Sadly, the concerns of her loving father were realized. Around the same time, Denali's mother went to the police station to report that Denali and her friend might know where Cynthia had gone and could be connected to the case. According to Denali's mother, both Denali and her 16-year-old friend, Caden McIntosh, claimed to know what happened to Cynthia. They were both interrogated, with the police particularly focused on why Denali was using a different name. When they met Caden, he caught the officer's attention. The boy was visibly shaking and gave confused, evasive answers, leading them to believe he should be questioned first. Caden was extremely nervous and soon admitted to murdering Cynthia Hoffman. He claimed that his 18-year-old girlfriend, Denali, had planned the murder but could not explain why. Denali was uncooperative from the start, avoiding communication with investigators, refuting Caden's account, and presenting an alternate narrative. She stated that she, Caden, and Cynthia went to Thunderbird Falls after school for a photo shoot. They intended to create a unique scene that involved using tape and ropes to stage a kidnapping, with Cynthia's mouth taped and her hands bound. Denali admitted that she carried a gun for self-defense, and all participants in the plan were aware of this. She recounted that at one point, Caden took the gun, aimed it at Cynthia, and attacked her in the back of the head without any clear reason. Denali said she was shocked and confused afterward, unsure of how to respond. The group simply disposed of the body in the water and left, as Caden commanded her to do so in a threatening manner, which intimidated her into compliance. She felt it wasn't worth informing the police to avoid causing a panic, worried that she might become another victim. Additionally, she couldn't provide any information about a motive for the murder. There were no known conflicts among them, and no one had witnessed such cruelty before. As a result of the statements, Caden McIntosh was charged with murdering Cynthia Hoffman. Criminologists examined the crime scene, and forensic experts conducted an autopsy. This led to the collection of enough evidence to reconstruct the events of June 2nd. However, the stories told by the young people at the police station contained many inconsistencies, particularly regarding the motive, which remained unclear. The mystery was clarified when law enforcement accessed Denali's mobile phone. They discovered that she was not just a witness to the murder, but also involved in it. The situation became clearer after examining her messages. After Cynthia's death, Denali posted on social media, "Oh, look what we just did," directed at someone named Tyler. This message was shockingly cynical and cruel, revealing not a grieving best friend but rather a brutal killer who took pride in her actions. The police obtained a Snapchat video that served as crucial evidence of Denali's guilt. This prompted them to question her again, as there was enough evidence to charge both Caden and Denali in connection with the murder. Caden claimed he had been manipulated and that Denali had suggested the attack. She continued to deny any wrongdoing until she was asked about Tyler, who was saved in her phone as a babe. The police found that shortly before the tragedy, Denali met a man from Kansas on an app where he claimed to be a millionaire. They started off communicating and flirting, but eventually, he sent her a disturbing message. Tyler gradually got Denali to open up about her preferences, including her intimate desires. He revealed that he was willing to pay $9 million for photos and videos depicting abuse violence. Denali became intrigued, and over time, her friend on social media convinced her to kill. Cynthia was an easy target because she was Denali's best friend, very naive, and completely trusted her. This made it easy for Denali to lure her into a trap. Investigators identified the car used by the young killers during the murder. It belonged to a relative of Denali. They interviewed Denali's 19-year cousin, Caleb Leland, who was aware of the $9 million offer and supported Denali, thinking the money would solve their financial issues. Denali had asked to borrow his car to take the victim and her accomplice to the murder scene. In return, she promised him $500,000. After agreeing to help facilitate the murder of an innocent person, Caleb was fully aware of her intentions. He confirmed that Cynthia's murder was not a result of a desire for a photo shoot or an accident, it was a planned act of revenge for money. Denali had discussed her plans with her brothers, detailing where she intended to take her best friend and outlining the murder plan in great detail. Although Caleb didn't fully believe Denali was serious at first, he grasped the seriousness of the situation only after hearing about Cynthia's death. However, his disbelief was just a cover. He was trying to downplay his role in the tragedy to lessen his potential punishment. Between May and June 2019, police focused their investigation on 3 suspects: Denali Bremer, Caden McIntosh, and Caleb Leland. They were believed to have plotted a murder together. As detectives gathered more evidence, it became increasingly clear that these teenagers were guilty. Notably, all 3 were friends of the victim, yet they betrayed her without remorse. Tragically, they valued $9 million more than the life of their friend. Investigators also found that 2 other teenagers were aware of the crime. However, they were minors at the time of the attack and were not considered accomplices. They had simply overheard Denali confessing to the crime. Their failure to report this information was disappointing, as they could have helped prevent the tragedy by alerting the police. To protect the minors and their families, their names were kept confidential and did not come up in court. The planning for the massacre began 4 months before the murder. On June 2, 2019, the juvenile offenders launched their attack. Denali invited Cynthia to join her and Caden on a hike to a remote area near Thunderbird Falls deep in the park. The accomplices had meticulously prepared their plan, even practicing with an unloaded gun. Denali pretended to be a future victim and used her brother's car, which he had lent her for $500,000. Once they reached the riverbank, Caden and Cynthia temporarily left Denali behind and advanced ahead. Suddenly, Caden drew a gun and pointed it at Cynthia's head. Denali caught up, restrained Cynthia by tying her hands and taping her mouth shut. Cynthia quickly realized this was not a prank, but it was too late for her to escape or shout for help. Terrified, she was forced to kneel. Denali's brother filmed the entire incident. Caden then shot Cynthia in the back of the head with a 9mm pistol, killing her instantly. Denali and Caden disposed of her body in the river and tried to erase any evidence linking them to the crime. They burned some of Cynthia's belongings, including her purse and mobile phone. Afterward, Denali sent a message to Cynthia's father, Timothy, from Cynthia's phone, fabricating a story about a scheduled meeting with a new boyfriend. Detectives later found evidence that Denali attempted to delete data from her mobile phone. However, despite her efforts, many conversations with Tyler remained, in which she detailed the murder plan and shared photos and videos related to the crime. Even after the murder was committed, she unsuccessfully tried to erase the incriminating evidence. In reality, she stayed in contact with Tyler throughout the murder, providing him with detailed updates. Although Tyler lived hundreds of kilometers away, he was just as responsible for the crime as the individuals who carried it out. Law enforcement focused on identifying him to ensure he faced justice. It is important to note that Tyler sought not only murder but also abuse violence. However, forensic experts found no evidence of such acts on the victim's body. This raised alarming implications, suggesting that if incentives had been provided, Denali and her accomplices might have continued to commit similar crimes. Fortunately, they were identified and arrested immediately after the first murder, and they did not receive any compensation from Tyler. Specialists were called in to investigate and traced the phone number of the perpetrator. It was revealed that Tyler was not in Kansas, but in Indiana. The actual mastermind behind the brutal crime was Darren Schillmiller, who grew up in New Salisbury. He had been exchanging photos with Denali for a while, but he had not sent her any pictures of himself. At first, Tyler had pretended to be a wealthy millionaire who won the lottery, but in reality, the instigator of the crime was a 21-year-old who was far from being a millionaire. Friends and family described him as a reclusive and strange person who had faced bullying during school. Darren had endured a difficult upbringing with an alcoholic father and had minimal social interaction in school. His unusual clothing style often led to conflicts, and after graduation, he was frequently seen engaging in suspicious activities, like chasing cats that later vanished without a trace. However, there had been no previous reports of cruelty from him. After completing his studies, he found it difficult to determine his path in life and was unable to secure a full-time job. This situation took Denali by surprise, as she genuinely thought she would receive $9 million for her crime. Once Denali discovered Tyler's real identity, she chose to cooperate with the prosecution. She revealed that she had been in an online relationship with Tyler for several months, during which he used pictures of an unrelated person from the internet to deceive her. This manipulation led her to be misled by the future killer. Denali expressed her desire to resolve her problems, and those of her family, through money, having dealt with her friend. However, this was not the only troubling request from the millionaire's friend. According to her, he urged her to commit abuse violence against 2 children, intending to use a 14-year-old and an 8-year-old boy for this purpose. They were meant to suffer and die in pain, enduring torture, abuse. Fortunately, this horrific plan never came to fruition. When the police arrived at Darren's door, he was taken aback and promptly confessed to everything. He admitted to having been in contact with Denali for several months, realized that she was easily influenced and manipulated. Consequently, this quiet, deceitful man convinced himself that he could take someone's life through another person. Denali acknowledged that she remained influenced by Tyler, even after he refused to finance the initial massacre. They continued to have faith in him, waited for payment, and naively hoped for a better life ahead. Meanwhile, Tyler manipulated them, holding on to their trust while blackmailing them with incriminating evidence of the murder. He then demanded more killings and continued his threats. Fortunately, law enforcement apprehended the entire gang before further harm could be done. The prosecutor's office charged all those involved in the massacre with conspiracy and premeditated murder. The 2 youngest participants, whose identities were never revealed, were also accused of being complicit because they hid the murderers' identities. They never even informed her parents, despite having the chance to potentially save her. The crime that occurred in Alaska gained significant media attention, sparking public outrage. Journalists were eager for a sensational story, which created challenges for the victim's family. The relatives of the young offenders also faced severe repercussions, including numerous threats and genuine fears for their safety. Cynthia's family mourned her loss, lamenting that her trusting nature and vulnerability, stemming from her developmental delays, ultimately led to her suffering. With the same level of intelligence as a 12-year-old, she believes she is surrounded by trustworthy individuals. Many people who knew Darren spoke to the media and the police about him. Several of his classmates described him as a strange teenager who was withdrawn and struggled to fit in. It was not surprising that he grew into a cruel internet troll with violent intentions. Detectives discovered a significant amount of incriminating material on his computer, including numerous files of child abuse, which led to additional charges against him. He also showed a disturbing desire for cruelty and torture. Evidence revealed that Denali was not the first victim of this liar. He used various social networks and messaging apps to create fake accounts, deceiving teenagers and even children. Initially, his actions were limited to obtaining obscene images, but feeling untouchable, he escalated his behavior. Over several years, he lured dozens of girls and women into his traps. Some of the victims, from whom he extorted obscene photos, testified in court. Once he received the first image, he began to blackmail them for more. Fortunately, many prior victims managed to escape Darren's grasp, partly due to police threats. Unfortunately, this was not the case for Denali, whom Darren acknowledged was the most naive of his victims. Denali and his accomplices were involved in one of the most serious crimes in Alaskan history, the brutal murder of Cynthia Hoffman. This tragic event highlighted themes of betrayal, greed, and folly. Cynthia fell victim to an online manipulator, failing to verify his identity, and ultimately led 4 others into the murder. The case remained confidential, but the lives of everyone involved were forever altered. In February 2023, Denali Bremer, 23, pleaded guilty to first-degree murder after charges of conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation to commit murder, tampering with evidence, and second-degree murder were dismissed. Nearly a year later, her sentencing will take place over 3 days in January and February 2024. The 99-year sentence is the maximum the court is allowed to impose, according to a press release from the Alaska Department of Justice. Caleb Leland, who provided the car for the crime, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in November 2023 and was sentenced to 30 years in prison in August 2024. On May 17, 2024, Caden McIntosh, 21, pleaded guilty to the murder of Cynthia. Anchorage Superior Court Judge Andrew Peterson accepted Caden's guilty plea to one count of second-degree murder. All other counts were dismissed as part of the agreement. The court will decide Caden's sentence at a sentencing hearing. The agreement between the parties allows the court to sentence Caden to a prison term of 30 to 85 years. Sentencing is scheduled to begin on November 14, 2024, before Judge Peterson and is expected to last 2 days. Caden is currently in the custody of the Alaska Department of Corrections and is no longer eligible for release under the terms of his release. Darren Showmiller, who solicited the murder, was 25 when his trial began. He chose not to defend himself, allowing his lawyer to read a statement to the jury. Darren admitted to making a grave mistake that led to the death of an innocent girl, expressing remorse and asking for forgiveness from her family. However, these words did not sway the jury, and he was sentenced to 99 years in prison for his actions that destroyed multiple lives. Every year on the anniversary of Cynthia's death, her father organizes a motorcycle ride to celebrate. Timothy Hoffman, 58, was among those attending the event on June 2, 2024, when friends and family gathered to remember Cynthia. However, he lost control of his motorcycle and died in the accident. On January 17, 1999, a man called 911 to report that he had found a woman unresponsive in her home. He was a friend of the victim, Miriam Illes, and had gone to check on her because she hadn't been answering his calls. When he arrived at her house, he discovered that it was locked and none of the doors would open. Looking through a window, he saw Miriam lying on the kitchen floor, clearly deceased. When the police arrived and entered the house, they found that she had been attacked in the back, specifically targeting her heart area. Investigators spoke with the man who called 911, who provided details about Miriam. She was a homemaker and had previously worked in the medical field. Miriam was active in her local community, and her friends were worried about her that day because she hadn't attended Sunday school. She was well-liked and devoted mother to a young boy, Richie. Everyone who knew her believed she had no enemies, which made her death in her locked kitchen even more perplexing. Determining Miriam's time of death was crucial, but without witnesses, the exact timing was uncertain. Police officers meticulously searched the crime scene for evidence, noting that the house appeared undisturbed and showed no signs of forced entry. All external doors to the house and garage were locked when Miriam's body was found. A telephone receiver lay near her hand, suggesting that she may have been on the phone when she was attacked, potentially catching her off guard and leaving her unaware of her attacker. Investigators also requested a report from the phone company to find out about Miriam's recent calls. While examining the crime scene to determine how the attacker entered and exited the house, detectives made a significant discovery. They found a bullet hole in a double-glazed window located just above the kitchen sink. This indicated that the person who shot Miriam was positioned outside. It appeared that Miriam had been standing, leaning against the sink, talking on the phone when she was shot. This single bullet became the key piece of evidence. Tracing the bullet's path, investigators followed it to a creek bed behind Miriam's house. As the investigation progressed, the forensics team found footprints left by size 14 Reebok basketball shoes. The placement of the tracks suggested that someone had taken a shooting stance next to a tree located right behind the kitchen window. The detectives also found a cigarette butt at the shooting site. Further searching revealed a homemade silencer, leading investigators to conclude that the crime was premeditated. The attacker had been hiding behind the tree, waiting for the right moment, smoking a cigarette, and seemed to act with intent. However, the motive behind the crime remained unclear. It did not appear that Miriam was involved in any illegal activities or taking risks that would endanger her. Investigators aimed to gather more information from Miriam's husband, Richard Illes, who arrived at the crime scene while they were there. Richard was a well-known cardiothoracic surgeon at Williamsport Hospital and had saved many lives. He met Miriam in the early 90s while serving as a resident at St. Louis Medical Center, where she worked as a surgical assistant. After marrying, they had a son named Richie and moved to Williamsport, where they both worked together. Miriam was active in her community, engaging in volunteer work at the symphony and church. Her vibrant personality made her well-liked among friends. Despite their wealth and status, Miriam's friends described her as down-to-earth, noting that they were among the richest people in Williamsport. Then she decided to become a stay-at-home mom, quitting her job when Richie was 2 years old and never returning to work. When Miriam was murdered in her own home, Richard became a primary focus for investigators. He told them that the last time he saw Miriam was 2 days earlier, on Friday, January 15, 1999, around 5 p.m., when he visited her before planning to travel to Chester County, Pennsylvania, to visit family. Detectives soon learned that Miriam and Richard had recently separated after 8 years of marriage, with Miriam moving out of their family home to the house where she was later found dead. She had primary custody of their son, Richie, while Richard visited the boy every weekend. Their ongoing divorce raised potential motives, prompting investigators to closely examine their relationship. Richard's behavior struck detectives as unusual. The first question he asked upon learning of Miriam's death was about the evidence that had been found, which seemed odd for someone who had just learned that his wife of 8 years and the mother of his child was dead. Additionally, Richard made an intriguing confession. He was familiar with firearms, having participated in hunting and owned guns, a common practice in the area. There was nothing particularly unusual about this admission. Investigators examined Richard's firearms to check for any connections to the crime scene. They determined that the bullet that killed Miriam was a .22 caliber, indicating the type of weapon they needed to find. Richard had several .22 caliber rifles, which the police confiscated for analysis. He became the primary suspect due to having a motive, access to weapons, and the skills necessary to commit the crime. The intense emotions in romantic relationships can shift from love to hate, which could have played a role in Miriam's death. While the weapon was being analyzed in the forensic lab, investigators looked further into Richard's personal life. As a cardiothoracic surgeon, he had a high income, but he was also paying a significant amount in child support, around $112,000 a month. This financial burden could have motivated him to want his wife dead. Investigators sought to clarify Richard's whereabouts at the time Miriam was attacked. Although Richard was supposed to pick up his son Richie that Friday evening, he opted to spend the weekend with his sister, who lived 2.5 hours away in Honeybrook, Pennsylvania. He had a witness, Nancy Mitch, who could confirm the start of his trip. Nancy informed the investigators that she was with Miriam when Miriam handed over her son, Richie, to Richard. He picked up Richie around 5 p.m., and after Nancy left, Miriam seemed to be fine. The last confirmed sighting of Miriam was around 6 p.m. on Friday, January 15th. The police established that Richard took Richie from Miriam's home and left while Miriam stayed behind, and everything seemed normal. Richard told investigators that he made a quick stop before going to his sister's house. He first stopped at his own home around 9:30 p.m. and then traveled toward southeastern Pennsylvania. He stated that they reached Lewisburg and stopped at a fast food restaurant around 10 p.m. due to bad weather that evening. He called his sister at 11:24 p.m. to inform her that they would spend the night near Harrisburg. Nancy confirmed part of Richard's alibi, prompting detectives to verify the rest of his statements. They checked Richard's cell phone records, which confirmed his call to his sister. He also had a hotel receipt from the Harrisburg area, where he checked in at 12:57 a.m. This corroborated Richard's account, indicating that he could not have been at the crime scene when Miriam was attacked. An examination of Richard's rifles showed that none matched the murder weapon, and the silencer found at the crime scene did not fit any of his rifles either. Furthermore, DNA samples from the silencer and a cigarette but did not match Richard's DNA. As the investigation progressed, police discovered that Richard had been having an affair with Catherine Swoyer, a colleague at Williamsport Hospital, which contributed to his separation from Miriam. His relationship with Miriam had begun similarly. He worked with her, they formed a bond, and eventually got married. A similar pattern occurred with Catherine. She worked with Richard, leading to their affair. This information led investigators to consider a possible love triangle. Catherine might have had a motive to kill Miriam in order to eliminate any chance of Richard reconciling with his wife. Jealousy can often drive people to commit terrible acts, but there were additional factors at play. In the event of a divorce, Richard and Miriam would need to divide their assets and finances. Furthermore, if they divorce, Richie is likely to stay with Miriam, which would require Richard to pay child support. Therefore, Miriam's death could be advantageous for both Richard and Catherine. Detectives aimed to determine Catherine's whereabouts at the time of Miriam's death. If Richard had left town to visit family, it would have given Catherine the opportunity to commit the murder. However, investigators confirmed that Catherine was out of town visiting relatives and could not have been involved in the crime. This left the police without any other suspects, as both Richard and Catherine had alibis. Then, an unexpected development emerged when a person claiming to be the murderer contacted the detectives by sending letters to the police station. The first anonymous letter stated that the writer was responsible for Miriam's murder. Detectives were perplexed, as this was an unusual occurrence. Initially, they suspected it might be a prank, possibly from teenagers or someone loosely connected to the case. The writer referred to himself as a soldier of God and a soldier of death, claiming that Miriam was a bad and immoral person. The letter was both confusing and unsettling. Despite attempts to make contact, the writer took great care to hide his identity. The letters were examined for fingerprints, but none were found. They were handwritten in block letters with a pencil, making it difficult for police to analyze the handwriting. While investigators were trying to make sense of the first letter, a second letter arrived, written in a different style and showing signs of arrogance and intellectual superiority. This new letter pointed to a potential suspect, as the author mentioned having multiple academic degrees, suggesting that the crime could have been committed by someone connected to Richard's professional circle. Investigators identified Dr. Ench Zama, Richard's close friend, as the most likely suspect. Zama was described as a tall man, likely with large feet, possibly in size 14. He became a key focus for investigators regarding the anonymous letters. During questioning, he examined both letters and suggested that someone might be trying to frame him. He denied any involvement in Miriam's death and claimed he was with friends at the time of the crime. The investigators verified his alibi and confirmed that he could not have attacked Miriam. The anonymous letters were also analyzed for DNA, revealing a black hair on the sealed flap of one envelope. The DNA did not match Zama or any other samples from the crime scene. This led investigators to suspect that someone was deliberately trying to mislead them. It seemed the letter writer had taken great care to hide their identity, but did they accidentally leave behind a hair? Investigators theorized that the hair was intentionally included to confuse them, as it belonged to someone unrelated to the case. They began to suspect that false evidence had been planted. The silencer with DNA, the cigarette butt, and the letters all suggested a deliberate effort to mislead the investigation. Investigators ended up with 4 DNA samples, each belonging to different individuals. The perpetrator had cleverly planted false evidence, hoping to mislead the police and hinder the investigation. However, investigators received the crucial information they had been waiting for since the first day of the investigation, when Miriam's body was discovered. Near her body, they found a phone receiver. Upon reviewing the phone records, they learned that Miriam had been on a call with a friend throughout the evening. When detectives met with this friend, she recounted that during their conversation, she heard glass breaking and then heard Miriam exclaim, "Oh my God." After that, she heard nothing more and hung up. When she called back, she received a busy signal, leading her to assume that the call had been disconnected and that Miriam was talking to someone else. This piece of information provided detectives with the key detail they had been missing. The call ended at 10:37 p.m., which corresponded exactly with the time of Miriam's death. This was significant for the investigation. With the established time of death, detectives revisited the alibis of all potential suspects. Richard's alibi appeared less credible. Initially, he claimed to have been in the Williamsport area and said he was heading south on Highway 15 by 10 p.m. He mentioned stopping for a meal at a restaurant, and if he had truly been at the restaurant at that time, he would not have been able to commit the crime. However, investigators could not verify his presence there at that time, which weakened his alibi. Then, at 11:24 p.m., Richard called his sister to inform her that he and Richie would need to stay at a hotel. This call became crucial for the investigation. Detectives began to trace Richard's cell phone location at the time of the call, which altered the direction of the investigation. The cell phone company provided coverage maps, allowing police to estimate where Richard made the call. They found that Richard had enough time to commit the crime and reach the hotel, where he checked in at 12:57 a.m. Detectives retraced the route from Miriam's home to the hotel, confirming that Richard could have committed the crime by 10:37 p.m. and still arrived in Harrisburg on time. The distance between the crime scene and the hotel was approximately 100 miles, and despite poor weather conditions, investigators made the trip within the required time frame. Now, Richard was the only suspect without an alibi. While this did not make him guilty, it did raise suspicions. The police needed concrete evidence to link him to the crime. They caught a break when two men walking in the woods found a modified rifle. Finding it unusual, they called the police. The rifle had a shortened barrel, a stock, and an optical sight, but the bolt was missing, and its serial numbers had been erased. It was identified as a rifle that matched the bullet that killed Miriam, and it was found near the road Richard drove on the night of the murder. Experts examined the suppressor found at the crime scene to see if it fit the rifle. They discovered that a screw had been added to the barrel, allowing the suppressor to attach perfectly. The challenge now was to link this weapon to Richard. The rifle was a Savage .23D Hornet, and police learned that Richard had inherited weapons from his father, with only his Aunt Jean being aware of this. A detective spoke with Richard's Aunt, Jean, who showed him a photo album. In a black and white photo, she revealed her brother, aka Richard's father, posing with a Savage .23D rifle. Too many coincidences pointed to Richard as a possible perpetrator. He had inherited the rifle along with other guns, but the Savage rifle was missing from his collection. Investigators needed more evidence for a conviction. They found several DNA samples at the scene that did not match Richard's. When the snow melted, they returned to the area where the rifle was found and conducted a detailed search. They discovered a pair of athletic shoes that matched the size and tread pattern of the footprints at the crime scene, indicating that the prints could have been left by the same shoes. The coincidence of the sneakers and rifle found in the woods being linked to the crime was highly unlikely. Experts needed to establish that the shoes belonged to Richard, but the sneakers were size 14, whereas Richard wore size 10. It was possible that he deliberately wore shoes that were not his size to confuse the police. The shoes were sent for forensic analysis. A hair was found on one of the sneakers, and DNA testing revealed that it did not match Richard's. This was another setback for the investigators, but they remained determined. They theorized that Richard had given his son, Richie, sleeping pills to keep him asleep in the car. A further hair test was conducted, this time looking for a match to Richie's DNA instead of Richard's. They found a match based on mitochondrial DNA. Richard had tried to use false DNA to mislead the police, but in the end, his son's DNA linked him to the murder. Investigators believe that Richie's hair accidentally made its way into the sneaker, possibly transferred from another surface when Richard changed shoes. In December 2002, 3 years after Miriam's death, Richard was unexpectedly arrested. He had been clever in planning the crime. He created an alibi, constructed a silencer, and intentionally wore the wrong shoe size. However, he left DNA evidence on the silencer and a cigarette butt. To mislead the investigation, he even mailed a hair to the police, but all the DNA samples turned out to belong to other individuals. Richard destroyed the serial numbers on the rifle to hide his tracks, but it appeared he rushed his alibi since he didn't properly conceal the rifle and boots. Richard had meticulously prepared for this crime, modifying the rifle and making a suppressor, which required considerable time and effort. He chose a weekend for the crime when his son, Richie, was staying with him to prevent his son from witnessing any violence. The plan began on Friday around 5 p.m. when he picked up Richie from Miriam's home. He returned a few hours later, parking approximately half a mile away from her house, and gave his son a sleeping pill to ensure he would sleep through the events that were about to unfold. Richard then walked to a spot by a tree along the creek bed, waiting for the right moment when Miriam was near the kitchen window. He couldn't shoot from any other angle, so he patiently waited for hours. At 10:37 p.m., while she was on the phone with a friend, he took his shot. He left behind evidence, a cigarette butt, intentionally placed where it could be discovered. He then fled the scene, leaving size 14 shoe prints, returned to his car, and drove south. He found a secluded area to dispose of his evidence, getting rid of the rifle and sneakers before heading back. At 11:24 p.m., he called his sister, hoping the phone records would support his alibi. However, they actually indicated that he had sufficient time to commit the murder. Though Richard did not admit to the crime, the jury reached a different conclusion and convicted him. In 2004, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Miriam's family issued a statement describing the situation as tragic, expressing that they felt there were no winners, but they were relieved to finally have closure and justice. Richard attempted to appeal the court's decision, but his efforts were unsuccessful. Let's head over to the small, quiet town of Malang in North Cotabato, Philippines. It's a place known for its calm vibe and rural charm, where life moves at a slower pace. The people here are deeply connected to the land, relying on agriculture for their livelihood. In this peaceful town lived the Magwad family. Unlike many others, they led a pretty stable life. Cruz Magwad, the father, was an elementary school teacher who was well respected and loved by everyone, often being praised for his hard work. His wife, Lovella, was the principal at the same school. Together, while they didn't make a lot of money, they were considered one of the more privileged families in town. Their youngest child, Criziol Lewis, was 16 years old. He dreamed of becoming a lawyer even at such a young age and was determined to work hard to achieve that goal. Besides being intelligent, he was also creative, playing guitar, drawing, and reading in his spare time. His older sister, Criziol Gwyn, was the more intense one, super smart, driven, and goal-oriented. She had always been that way as a kid, being a Girl Scout with a sash covered in so many badges that there was no room for more. Gwyn didn't stop there. She enrolled in a pre-med program during high school and planned to become a doctor. By all accounts, Gwyn was the type of person who would sit with you at a party if you were feeling shy, sticking by your side until you felt at ease. That's how she met 17-year-old Janice Sebiel. However, unlike Gwyn and Lewis, Janice's childhood was far from happy. She wasn't privileged enough to attend school and had to work from a very young age. Even worse, she grew up without parents. Her first real memories began around the age of 8. Before that, everything was a blur. She only recalls being found by a stranger wandering alone on a huge shipping container boat. Her parents were nowhere to be found, and Janice believed they had abandoned her. A stranger was kind enough to post her picture and name online in an attempt to find her parents. They shared her story on Facebook and various online forums, but no one ever came forward. Eventually, Janice was dropped off at the Philippine version of Child Protective Services, the Department of Social Welfare and Development, where she moved from one foster home to another. Not long after, Janice was offered a live-in nanny job by a family. Though she hated the job, she was incredibly grateful for the opportunity. Janice shared all of this with Gwyn, and Gwyn was so deeply moved by her story that an idea began to form in her mind, an idea that could give Janice the safe, loving home she deserved: adoption. Together with Lewis, Gwyn decided to present this idea to their parents. Like a well-thought-out thesis, they approached the subject with serious dedication, explaining that adopting Janice wouldn't just change her life, it would help their family too. They convinced their parents that Janice could pitch in with the chores around the house, which was a significant consideration in their Asian family culture. It wasn't uncommon for children to share the responsibility of washing dishes, cleaning, and cooking. With one more set of hands to help, the family would run more smoothly. Gwyn's parents weren't exactly rolling in money, but they believed in teaching responsibility. The kids had chores, had to keep their grades up, and attended church every Sunday. They were strict, but it was out of love. Gwyn and Lewis respected that. In 2021, Janice moved in, and it was like she was instantly part of the family. The Magwad welcomed her with open arms. Lewis even gave up his own room so Janice could have a more comfortable one. They enrolled her in school right away, and for the first time, Janice didn't have to wake up with the constant worry of finding food or going to work. She was finally allowed to be a kid. As Janice settled into her new life, the bond between the three siblings grew stronger by the day. We could see the happiness shining through, especially in the videos they posted on TikTok. Janice even got to experience a family vacation for the first time, something she had always dreamed of. Laughter filled the air as they explored new places together, creating memories she would cherish forever. For once, Janice felt like she belonged to something bigger, something safe and full of love. But just when everything seemed perfect, Janice's world was about to shatter. On December 10th of that same year, she posted a series of statuses on Facebook claiming that she and her siblings were under attack. It was just days before Christmas, a time that should have been filled with joy. Instead, it marked the beginning of a nightmare. At that time, Mr. Cruz, their father, was at school doing some chores related to the upcoming holiday, while Lovella, their mother, was away on a work trip. Everything changed when Mr. Cruz received a phone call that left him frozen in terror. The voice on the other end told him that their home was being ransacked, and his children were inside. By 3:15 in the afternoon, Cruz finally arrived at the house. It was eerily silent outside the front door. His eyes locked onto a blood-soaked blanket on the ground with a knife nearby. He called out for his kids, but there was no response. He moved quickly to the back door and managed to find a way inside. Cruz moved rapidly through the house, his voice echoing off the walls as he searched for his children. When he entered the living room, that a horrifying sight met his eyes. There, lying on the floor, was his daughter Gwyn. A towel soaked in blood was wrapped around her body, her limbs and torso were covered in multiple slash wounds. But it was the injuries on her neck that were particularly severe. Crime scene photos later revealed the gruesome extent of the wounds. Her flesh was torn apart, and ants had already begun to gather on her body. Not far from Gwyn, near the main door, Cruz found Lewis. His hands and feet were bound, and a gag covered his mouth. His body was riddled with fresh stab wounds, and the amount of blood suggested that the attack had happened just moments before Cruz arrived. But there was one more person missing. Janice's heart pounded as Cruz continued to search the house, calling her name. Finally, Janice appeared. She emerged from her room, her hair wet and her face pale and shaken. She was in shock, barely able to speak. Seeing her, Cruz immediately called the police. The officers arrived soon after, stepping into a crime scene that would later be described as one of the most gruesome in the Philippines. Blood pooled on the floor, and the house bore the marks of extreme violence. Janice, while trembling, told the officers that they had been attacked. The house was in disarray, cabinets had been pried open and personal belongings were scattered across the rooms. At first glance, it seemed like a robbery. However, investigators knew that appearances could be deceiving. They needed to confirm whether anything valuable had been taken to solidify the robbery theory. At the same time, as part of their protocol, the police did not rule out the parents as persons of interest. The police needed to confirm their alibis and whereabouts during the attack. The investigators turned their attention to the room where Janice said she was hiding during the attack. It was messy, but that wasn't unusual for a robbery scene. What stood out, though, were the details that didn't add up. The disarray in the room, though chaotic, didn't have the usual signs of a real robbery. So the police began to search the house more carefully, and they soon found some crucial evidence just outside the front door. The police discovered a blood-stained shirt, which they believed had been dropped by the attacker while trying to escape. About 100 meters away, they found a plastic bag in a ditch. Inside were bloody pants and underwear. It seemed the attacker had deliberately discarded these items to hide evidence. Inside the house, the scene became increasingly horrifying. The living room floor was littered with shards of glass and broken bottles, a clear sign of the violence that had unfolded there. Expansive pools of blood reveal the brutal nature of the attack. Among the carnage, investigators discovered a discarded knife, a baseball bat, and a hammer, each stained with blood. These weapons were assumed to have been used in the murders. Crime scene analysts took careful note of the blood patterns, which provided key insights into the sequence of events. They determined that Gwen, the older sibling, had likely been killed first. Her blood had partially coagulated and rigor mortis had already begun to set in. In contrast, Lewis's blood appeared much fresher, suggesting he had been murdered after Gwen. The different states of the blood and bodies made this theory even more plausible. Lewis's hands and feet were bound, while Gwen's were not. This discrepancy indicated that Gwen might have been ambushed and killed quickly, while Lewis was restrained, likely to prevent him from resisting before his own murder. The fact that so many different tools were used and that the victims had distinctive types of wounds strongly suggested the involvement of more than one attacker. This theory was supported by the fact that Lewis had been restrained. It would have been difficult for a single person to control a victim while also carrying out such a brutal attack. Adding to the mystery, crews confirmed that the weapons found at the scene were his. The murderers seemed to have used tools that were readily available in the house, which made the crime even more unsettling. As investigators continued to gather evidence, they found something that stood out. The family's laundry machine had been used, but there were no freshly washed clothes anywhere in the house. This odd discovery suggested that something unusual had happened after the crime, perhaps an attempt to erase evidence or cover their tracks. The extreme brutality of the crime prompted local authorities to launch a manhunt for the suspects. The public was shocked, and the need for justice became urgent. To help with the investigation, the vice of the Municipal Council of Mlang, North Cotabato announced a reward of 200,000 pesos for any information leading to the capture of the perpetrators. The mayor also offered an additional 50,000 pesos as a bounty. These actions emphasized the gravity of the case and the community's desperate need for answers. Autopsies were performed on Gwen and Lewis over 2 days, starting on December 13, 2021, and the results were chilling. Gwen had sustained 32 stab and slash wounds, some of which were deep enough to almost sever her limbs. One of her ears had been cut off, and her neck and upper arm were nearly severed. Her body also showed signs of blunt force trauma, likely caused by the hammer and baseball bat found at the scene. Additionally, the backs of her hands were bruised, covered in defensive wounds, indicating that she had fought fiercely. Meanwhile, Lewis had endured 51 knife wounds, some so deep that they exposed his bones and internal organs. Red marks on his neck suggested he may have been strangled. Unlike his sister, Lewis had no defensive wounds. He also had signs of blunt force trauma on his limbs and torso. All these injuries were consistent with the weapons recovered at the scene. Investigators quickly ruled out the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. Though the rooms appeared ransacked, only Gwen's phone was missing. Nothing else of value had been taken, leading authorities to believe that the killer or killers were familiar with the victims. It was also striking that the crime took place in broad daylight, which made the entire situation even more unsettling. Before the autopsy results were made public, rumors began circulating online accusing Janice of being involved in the crime. These rumors gained traction due to her survival, the weapons being from the family home, and the locked front door. The accusations grew increasingly intense, with some even threatening Janice. Under the mounting pressure, the police decided to question her. Janice described the events of that day. She had been studying with Gwen in her bedroom while Lewis was downstairs in the living room. Suddenly, they heard screams, and 3 men broke into the house. The 2 girls rushed downstairs and saw the 3 men attacking Lewis with the weapons found at the scene. The attackers then turned on Gwen. In fear, Janice fled upstairs, locked herself in her bedroom, and hid under the bed. Janice was too scared to call the police, so instead, she texted the family group chat asking for help. Later, she messaged her adoptive mom saying, "Mom, help." When no one saw those messages, Janice went a step further and posted on social media, saying, "Help. Somebody has broken into the house. I don't want to die. I'm hiding in my room. Help. After a few minutes, she deleted the post, worried the attackers might see it and come after her. By the time someone saw the post and reached out to her mom, Janice was too scared to pick up. She even changed her social media username and put her phone on silent, clearly trying to hide. When the house finally fell silent, Janice emerged from her hiding place, too afraid to go downstairs. She claimed she took a shower and changed clothes to calm herself, finishing just as Cruz arrived home. However, there was something odd about this part of the story. Janice had told the police she locked herself in her bedroom the moment the attack began, so why did her room look like it had been ransacked? That raised serious questions. More importantly, Janice's version of events was directly at odds with the forensic evidence. The autopsy results and the way the injuries were distributed made it clear that Gwyn was the first victim, not Lewis. This major discrepancy between Janice's account and the evidence made investigators even more suspicious. Something wasn't adding up, and they started to take a closer look at Janice's statements. At first, she told the police her phone was off during the attack, but Cruz remembered calling her phone and hearing it ring with no answer. When Janice was confronted with this, she changed her story again, now claiming that she had been in the shower and hadn't heard her phone ringing. This was starting to sound suspicious. But that wasn't the only thing that raised eyebrows. Cruz also revealed some information about the murder weapons that added fuel to the fire. The baseball bat used in the attack originally belonged to Lewis. He had kept it in his room on the top bunk as a kind of protection. However, after being adopted by Cruz, Janice had taken over the top bunk. The hammer used in the attack was another tool that Cruz kept around for home repairs. He was very careful about where he stored it, usually hiding it behind the washing machine. Cruz mentioned that only 3 people knew exactly where that hammer was: himself, Gwyn, and Janice. This meant that the killer or killers had to have known the family's routines and possessions very well, almost as if they had been living in the house with them. Things became even more suspicious when a delivery driver came forward. The driver had arrived at the house just 18 minutes before Cruz was contacted by a neighbor who noticed that no one had answered the door. The driver kept calling out, hoping someone would respond. Eventually, he noticed a woman peering at him through a door before she suddenly walked away. The woman's identity was never confirmed, but it raised serious doubts about where Janice was and what she was doing during the attack. At the crime scene, it had been locked from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry. This was significant because it meant that whoever had done this was likely someone familiar with the house, someone who had access to a key and could lock the door after the crime. At this point, it was pretty clear that Janice had something to do with the murders. However, since Janice was only 17 years old, still a minor. Under Philippine law, the police couldn't arrest her without solid proof. This legal issue made them tread carefully, as they couldn't move forward with an arrest until they had more definitive evidence. Rather than arresting her immediately, the authorities placed Janice under the care of the Social Welfare Department while they investigated who had actually committed the murders. If Janice's claim about other people being involved was true, the police had a considerable amount of work ahead of them. 5 days after the murders, a significant breakthrough occurred. The police discovered Janice's fingerprints on the murder weapons. This was a huge deal, but it wasn't the smoking gun. After all, Janice had lived in the house where the weapons were stored, so her prints could have been there simply from handling them. Still, it was a lead they couldn't ignore. To ensure she wasn't treated unfairly, Janice was given a lawyer by the Social Welfare Department. However, things took another unexpected turn when Lovella, Janice's adoptive mother, found a contact tracing form while searching Janice's room for clues. To her surprise, it wasn't Janice's form. It belonged to a 17-year-old boy named Esmeraldo Aldo Cano Jr. Aldo was a sacristan at a local church, and Janice had known him from the orphanage. This discovery sent the police scrambling to determine if Aldo had anything to do with the murders. Soon enough, witnesses came forward confirming that Aldo had been near the crime scene on the day of the killings. One woman stated she saw Aldo drop Janice off near the house right before the murders, and another neighbor said she saw him asking for directions to the house that morning. When shown a picture of Aldo, the woman immediately recognized him. Then, on December 16th, 6 days after the murder, Janice, with her lawyer present, gave a full confession. She admitted to being involved in the murders along with Aldo. Janice explained that her motive stemmed from deep resentment and jealousy. She felt that Gwyn and Lewis were receiving all the love and attention from their parents. In her mind, they were standing in the way of her getting the affection she had longed for. She even confessed that killing them would leave her as the only child in the family, guaranteeing that she would get all the love and attention she had recently started receiving after being adopted. Janice revealed that her ultimate goal was to take Gwyn's place in the family, driven by years of emotional neglect in the orphanage where she had grown up. By December 18th, Janice's confession was officially recorded, although it was inconsistent, much like many of her previous statements. The police tracked down Aldo, who voluntarily surrendered, admitting his role as well. Forensic analysis later confirmed that blood found on discarded clothing in a ditch belonged to Aldo. Like Janice, Aldo was also a minor, so he was placed under the care of the Social Welfare Department. Later that same day, in an unrelated banned substance raid, police arrested a 17-year-old for possession of illegal substances. When they searched his phone, they found something that tied him to the case: Gwyn's stolen cell phone. The serial number confirmed it had been taken after the murders. The police pieced it together. Janice had enlisted Aldo to sell the phone because she couldn't get rid of it herself. Unfortunately, the phone had been damaged, making it impossible to retrieve any useful data. The boy who had the phone wasn't involved in the murders, he had simply bought it from Aldo. Because Janice and Aldo were minors, the police couldn't release any juicy details about their confessions to the public, despite the parents pressing for information. As the investigation progressed, Janice stopped cooperating, making it even harder to figure out exactly what had happened. Some people believe Janice's confessions weren't even the full story. Whispers circulated that the murders were even worse than she had let on, like the possibility that Lewis was tied up and forced to watch as his sister was murdered before he was killed as well. After the shocking confessions, Lovella, the siblings' mother, was interviewed and reflected on the warning signs she had missed. According to Lovella, they had adopted Janice 5 months before the murders. At first, everything seemed fine, the family welcomed her, and she appeared grateful. However, soon small red flags began to show. In August 2021, when Gwyn's parents were hospitalized, Cruz noticed that 10,000 pesos, about $170, set aside for emergencies was missing. Janice claimed thieves had taken it, but the next day a large sum was found hidden in her school bag. After some questioning, Janice admitted she had taken the money. Despite this breach of trust, the family, particularly Gwyn, chose to forgive her. They were sympathetic to her troubled past, attributing the theft to the survival instinct she had developed after years of hardship. Janice apologized, and the family, hoping this was a one-time mistake. They accepted her apology, believing the worst was behind them. However, as months passed, Janice's behavior started to shift in unsettling ways. She became lazy, irresponsible, neglecting household chores and showing a disregard for reminders. She apologized but never followed through. Although troubling, it didn't raise any immediate alarms until the morning of the murders. On that day, Janice did something she had never done before. She called Cruz and Lovella mom and dad for the first time. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a red flag, indicating a deeper, darker shift in her emotional state. It was as if something had clicked in her mind, setting in motion what was about to happen. As the investigation unfolded, more shocking truths came to light. Janice had lied about her origins from the start. Her story of being an orphan was a fabrication. Her parents were alive and had spent years desperately searching for her. When the case went viral, Filipino amateur sleuths dug into her past and uncovered a nearly decade-old missing persons notice. Her parents weren't very active on Facebook back then, so they missed the post. Fast forward to the murders, and that same post started circulating online again. It didn't take long for Janice's biological parents to recognize her. Born in 2005, Janice was the youngest of 3 children, but her childhood was filled with chaos. Her father's gambling addiction tore the family apart, and after remarrying, Her mother tried to make the best of the situation by dividing what little they had left among her children. Eventually, Janice and her siblings were placed in different orphanages. By 2020, Janice had actually reunited with her biological family, but that reunion didn't last long. Her relatives later claimed she cut them off, saying they were too poor to be of any use to her. This betrayal shocked everyone. Things took a darker turn when Janice's biological mother, devastated by what her daughter had done, attended the funeral of Gwen and Lewis. In her grief, she kept apologizing, overwhelmed with guilt about her daughter's actions. In one heartbreaking moment, Janice's biological mother even knelt down, but the Magwad weren't seeking revenge. They made it clear that they weren't angry, only seeking justice. They insisted that Janice's biological mother encourage her daughter to confess. Janice's mother tried to visit Janice at the social welfare office, but Janice refused to see her, citing strict rules. Then, the investigation took a jaw-dropping turn when evidence surfaced suggesting the murders were premeditated. Screenshots of a conversation between Janice and an unknown person went viral. In the messages, Janice confessed that she wanted to kill her siblings, thinking their deaths would give her the freedom she craved. She even wondered if anyone would still accept her if she committed murder, expressing a chilling belief that no matter what she did, God would forgive her if she asked. Some sources claim that Janice often talked about the 2009 horror movie The Orphan, a film about a young girl adopted by a family who ultimately betrays and kills them. She even posted on Facebook that she loved the movie and watched it repeatedly. When Janice's trial began, her behavior was just as disturbing. She was seen smiling and laughing in court, showing no remorse or regret. Cruz and Lovella, devastated by the loss of their children, said in interviews that they might have forgiven Janice if she had shown even a hint of genuine remorse, but her coldness only deepened their pain. The case became a national sensation in the Philippines. From March 2022, when Janice and Esmeralda were officially charged with murder, to their conviction on May 17, 2022, the case was closely followed by the public. Janice Sibiel was sentenced to 31 years in prison, while Esmeralda Aldo Cano Jr. received a 29-year sentence. However, both sentences came with one condition: they would serve them under the supervision of the Department of Social Welfare and Development until their 21st birthdays, after which they would be transferred to adult prisons. Gwen and Lewis's parents had mixed feelings about the trial's outcome. While they recognized that the courts handed down the toughest punishment possible under the law, they felt the laws were too soft. The biggest issue, however, was Janice's complete lack of remorse. Cruz and Lovella were outspoken against Republic Act 9344, which limits the legal accountability of minors. According to this law, the minimum age for criminal liability is 15, and individuals between the ages of 15 and 18 can be held accountable but are sent to youth centers or rehab programs instead of adult prisons. This law prevents minors like Janice from being tried as adults, even for heinous crimes. Many argued that kids shouldn't be capable of planning or committing such brutal acts. In the US and other countries, minors committing these kinds of crimes would have been tried as adults. Cruz and Lovella felt strongly that Janice's age shouldn't excuse her from taking full responsibility, especially for such a violent and premeditated crime. This view was shared by many who felt the law was too lenient in cases like this. They publicly called for changes to the law, wanting those who commit violent acts at a young age to be held fully accountable. Some of the most heartbreaking facts to come out of the investigation revealed that Gwen almost escaped. She had the chance to run, but when she heard Lewis calling for help, she went back, hoping to save her brother. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore: the case of Alice Trappler. On April 19, 2012, an incident occurred in a remote area of upstate New York. At approximately 11 p.m., Frank Bennett called 911 to report that an intruder had broken into his home and killed his son, Daniel Bennett. After the attack, the intruder fled the scene. Frank reported that he did not witness the crime. He was in the basement when he heard the front door open and the lights turn on. A short time later, he heard a loud bang. Frank quickly ran upstairs, but when he reached the first floor, he only heard the sound of cars on the street. The mysterious intruder was gone, leaving behind a lifeless body. When the police arrived, they found Frank outside the house, in shock at what he had witnessed. The father could not believe that his beloved son was dead, and he was also afraid that the killer might return. After calming down, Frank's account was confirmed. The police entered the house and found Daniel lying on the sofa in the living room. It appeared that he had been attacked unexpectedly while he was sleeping. After examining the crime scene, forensic experts quickly discovered a spent ammunition box outside the door. It was clear that this was not a robbery because no valuables were missing, and there were no signs of a struggle or forced entry. The attacker had acted quickly, suggesting that the murder occurred in just a few seconds. However, the motive behind the crime remained unclear. Given the situation, the police suspected that it might be due to personal reasons. They began investigating Daniel's family and friends to gather more information. Frank suggested a possible motive for this violent act. His son was scheduled to appear in court the next day to fight for custody of his 5-month-old daughter, Lily. The divorce with Alice had been very difficult. Police considered Daniel's wife, Alice Trappler, to be the prime suspect in the case. Alice Trappler grew up in a small town called Edison. However, she was born in Philadelphia, where she lived with her parents before they bought a farm away from the city to raise their children. After graduating from high school, Alice moved away, attended college, and began working on a construction site in Texas. She eventually returned to Philadelphia and became a successful landscape designer. Alice was an energetic girl from a small town. As a child, she was a bit mischievous, but that did not affect her close relationship with her parents. She often drove 4 hours to Edison to visit them on weekends. During one of these visits, she met Thomas Wesley Borden, who became her first husband. This meeting took place in 2002. He had a troubled past, having dropped out of school in the 9th grade. Then a series of troubles began to plague him. Thomas often stole small items, had no steady job, and frequently worked as a repairman on local farms. This was his situation when he met Alice. He immediately fell in love with her vibrant and energetic personality. Thomas was attracted to Alice's natural beauty and intelligence. They had similar personalities, as they were both energetic and outgoing. At the time, Alice was in a relationship with another man, but she ended it for Thomas, and their romance quickly blossomed. Within 6 months, they were married and moved to Philadelphia, where Alice owned a house. Thomas supported Alice in everything. Alice had always dreamed of having a large family, but she struggled to conceive. Therefore, she took on the role of stepmother to Thomas's 2 daughters from a previous marriage. However, after only a few months of living together, Alice realized that she did not truly understand Thomas and had rushed into the marriage. At first, she tried to control their situation, but soon discovered that Thomas was unpredictable and irresponsible. He would often leave home for days at a time, leaving Alice and the children behind. This behavior frustrated Alice, while Thomas grew tired of her worries. Moreover, he showed little concern for Alice's feelings. Although she tried to maintain the marriage for 4 years, Alice eventually lost patience. She did not want to leave Thomas's children, to whom she was very attached, in the care of their irresponsible father. So, she filed for divorce and also requested custody. In 2009, a challenging trial began, with neither side willing to compromise. Finally, they reached an agreement that the girls would live with their paternal grandparents, who would take good care of them. Thomas's children still visit Alice in Edison regularly. After moving in with her mother in 2010, Alice bought an old farmhouse. She renovated the house, making use of her construction skills. Her business is thriving and is expected to grow even more in the near future. Overall, her life has improved significantly since the divorce. She has yet to realize her dream of having children of her own and rarely sees Thomas's children. Living alone has become boring for her. Her life changed dramatically when a new man, Daniel Bennett, entered her life. They met online in late 2010. He also grew up on a farm and is a strong man who always helps his parents with hard work. Daniel has a stubborn personality and can be rude, but he has never been in trouble with the law. In February 2011, Alice learned that she was pregnant. Overjoyed, she shared the news with Daniel, who was also delighted and decided to move in with her. They soon got married, but Alice's controlling nature soon emerged. She wanted to control every aspect of their lives, while Daniel valued his freedom and did not like being controlled. This led to frequent minor disagreements. These conflicts escalated, resulting in increasingly irrational arguments over small issues, which left Daniel frustrated. Just 6 months after meeting, the couple decided to split after Alice hit Daniel over the head with a coffee pot. He moved out, calling her crazy, and returned to live with his parents. However, Daniel still wanted to be involved in his daughter's life after she was born and sought to share custody, so he made an effort to maintain a relationship with Alice. Daniel contacted her almost every day to check on her well-being, but Alice never responded. She ignored all his messages, which frustrated him. Their relationship was strained. Alice often behaved rudely and even threatened him. She said that their communication felt like a conflict. In addition, she refused to see him and was hostile on the phone. It seemed that she did not want to maintain a relationship with him and did not want him to be a part of their child's life. 7 months after their separation, a baby girl was born. Alice did not inform Daniel about the birth and forbade him from seeing the child. This was a significant blow to Daniel, who had been pleading to see his daughter. However, Alice remained steadfast in her decision. So Daniel sought legal help to resolve the situation. According to the lawyer, the mother had no right to deny the father access to his daughter, but to prove this, a trial was necessary. Consequently, Daniel filed a lawsuit in family court to gain access to his child. The proceedings could be lengthy. Finally, a court date was set for April 20. This was a hopeful moment for Daniel, but the hearing never took place. He was murdered in his home the day before. Officers who arrived at the scene spoke to neighbors, some of whom confirmed hearing a loud bang just before an SUV drove away. The front door of the house was open, and Daniel was found dead. The only evidence was a spent 12-gauge cartridge case. A ballistics test is pending, which may provide further clues. Frank said that Daniel often complained about Alice's controlling behavior, especially after they split up when she forbade him from visiting their daughter. After breaking up with Alice, Daniel moved in with his father. On the day Daniel was killed, he was relaxing in front of the TV after a long day at work and fell asleep just before he was murdered. Frank also recalled that last Christmas, Alice called him out of the blue and asked to meet so he could see his granddaughter. He was delighted and agreed, but he used the opportunity to convince Alice to allow Daniel to see their child. He believed that children should have a relationship with both their father and mother. However, Alice became defensive and firmly stated that she would never allow Daniel to see their child. Frank was extremely upset, feeling that Alice's decision was both illegal and unjustified. He believed that Daniel would make a great father and saw no justification for Alice's restrictions. After Alice's call, Daniel sought legal help and went to court, but his hearing was repeatedly postponed until it was rescheduled. Tragically, a murderer disrupted all his plans. The police quickly established a motive for the crime, believing that the connection was not random. First, they needed to talk to Alice, who arrived at the courthouse at around 5 a.m., the day after the murder. Just hours later, Lily's custody hearing took place. The police considered her the prime suspect, and at that time, She was living in Edison, 30 kilometers from the scene of the tragedy. Alice was surprisingly calm when she heard the news of her ex-husband's death. When the police spoke to Alice, it was clear that she was very angry with him. She recounted that he had often insulted her and had been abusive throughout their time together. Alice described Daniel as a bad person who struggled with drug addiction. She also mentioned that they were in a custody battle over their daughter, a legal struggle that Daniel had initiated, and that she was determined not to give in to him. Despite this hostility, Alice insisted that she had nothing to do with the murder. She claimed that she had an alibi for the time of the incident, stating that she was at home with her mother, who later confirmed her story. When asked about a handgun, Alice denied ever having used it, and the police confirmed that the weapon was not registered in her name. However, this did not eliminate her as a suspect, as she could have purchased the weapon illegally, and her alibi was not entirely reliable. Unfortunately, the police were unable to find any information that could advance the case. They then chose to investigate Daniel's other acquaintances and friends who might have had a motive for the crime. Many described Daniel as a difficult person who frequently got into fights at bars. As a result, the police identified several potential suspects who had conflicts with Daniel in various ways. They compiled a long list of these individuals and began interviewing them. Although each had grievances against Daniel, none had a strong motive for the murder. The investigation was losing momentum, and it was clear that a vital lead was needed, as there were too many angry residents in the city who might want to take revenge on him. It was necessary to narrow down the list of suspects. One of Daniel's neighbors went to the police station after the murder. While she was getting the mail, she discovered a shotgun shell casing on the road. Concerned, she reported her discovery to the sheriff's department. At first glance, the shell casing did not seem unusual since hunting season had just begun, and many people in rural areas used that type of ammunition. However, because it was close to the crime scene, it had the potential to be important evidence. When the police arrived, they compared the shell casing to the one that caused Daniel's death. They found that they were an exact match. The police were then able to trace the shell casing to the store where it was purchased. They searched the area around where the shell casing was found and discovered 3 more shell casings. All of these had been purchased from the hunting section of a local Walmart. This discovery provided a vital lead in the investigation. The police requested surveillance footage from the store and reviewed it. They identified a man who had purchased the boxes of ammunition just 4 hours before the murder, around 7 p.m. The footage clearly showed him, and the police were able to track him as he left the store, including his license plate, thanks to outdoor cameras. The police quickly identified the owner of one of the vehicles as Thomas West Borden, Alice's first husband. While this footage was not enough to convict him, it was a clue for the police to investigate Thomas further. They had 2 main suspects, Alice and Thomas. It was likely that they had planned to kill Daniel together. While Thomas could be considered a potential perpetrator or accomplice, the only evidence against him was the purchase of the ammunition. Alice was not officially considered a suspect because she had an alibi confirmed by her mother. The GPS on her phone showed that she was at home, but the seasoned police officer suspected that she might be the mastermind behind the events. The police contacted Thomas, asking him to come to the station for questioning without providing a specific reason. They hoped to indirectly confirm their suspicions through him. However, Thomas informed the police over the phone that he was out of town at the time of the call. He could not provide an exact date for his return, saying that he could be absent for 2 weeks to a month due to important business. He then stated that unless the police had a warrant for his arrest, he had no intention of going to the police station over a minor matter. This situation raised suspicion, and he understood why they wanted to talk to him. As the phone conversation continued, Thomas became increasingly anxious. At one point, he suddenly declared, that he would kill himself if the pressure did not ease. The police realized the urgency of the situation and knew that they needed to quickly locate Thomas before he did anything drastic. They decided to track the GPS location of the call and found him near a cell tower in a suburb of Philadelphia, along with his car. Soon, the pursuit began. The chase lasted only a few blocks before Thomas abandoned his pickup truck in a parking lot and fled on foot. However, another police unit arrived to stop him. Thomas gave a false name, but when asked for identification, he surrendered his driver's license. When the officers discovered the lie, they acted quickly to arrest him. Thomas began to run away again, leading several cars and police officers to chase him. They pursued him to the nearest train tracks, possibly because he intended to use the train to escape and distract the police. However, Thomas was exhausted and realized that he could not outrun them. In a moment of desperation, he jumped in front of a train and took his own life. Some even blamed the police for his death. This development left the police without their only lead regarding Daniel's murder. In their desperation, the police decided to talk to people who had interacted with Thomas in the days before his death. Thomas's half-brother Nathan Hand lived with him. Shortly before Daniel's murder, Thomas had moved in with Nathan, and they spent a lot of time together. During this period, Thomas rekindled his relationship with Alice and felt happy, as he had struggled to cope with their breakup. He had hoped to reunite with her, so he agreed to resume contact. However, Nathan suspected that Alice had an ulterior motive for returning to Thomas. Nathan said that just before the incident, Alice had made a request regarding Daniel. For the sake of the person he loved, Thomas agreed to everything and followed Alice's instructions. Nathan recalled that at around 8 p.m. on April 19, Thomas returned from Walmart and quickly began preparing for something important, saying that he would confront Daniel at Alice's request. Nathan observed that Thomas was wearing camouflage pants, a dark shirt, and a mask. When asked about his plans, Thomas insisted that he would confront Daniel. Nathan tried to dissuade him, but to no avail. Thomas asked Nathan to drive him to Daniel's house. During the drive, Thomas revealed that he not only intended to beat Daniel, but also to kill him. He was determined to get rid of Daniel once and for all. Despite Nathan's attempts to convince him otherwise, Thomas also mentioned that this plan originated with Alice. He kept in touch with her throughout the evening via phone and text messages. When they arrived at Daniel's house around 11 p.m., Thomas retrieved the weapons from the trunk of the car. He claimed that Alice had given him the weapons for this purpose and that he had purchased the ammunition. They got out of the car and stood on either side of the front door. Nathan pushed the door open and turned on the lights, allowing Thomas to rush inside and kill Daniel. They then fled the scene, jumping into the car and driving away. As they left, Thomas threw the remaining shell casings out the window, landing in a neighbor's yard and eventually leading the police to their door. Nathan claimed that they buried the weapons at the park. Police were able to locate the weapon based on Nathan's description. He also mentioned that Alice was not present during the attack. She was at home and was in contact with Thomas on the phone. Nathan was arrested in connection with the crime. On April 24, a deputy sheriff visited Alice's home, and she denied any involvement in the crime. In 2013, Alice went to trial for the murder of Daniel Bennett. She was charged with multiple crimes, facing a possible sentence of 15 years to life in prison. By this time, Thomas, the real perpetrator, was dead. The prosecution argued that he was just a pawn controlled by the real mastermind behind the crime. They believed that Alice had planned and manipulated Thomas into carrying out the act. The prosecution gathered a significant amount of evidence that linked Alice to the crime. Evidence included correspondence between her and Thomas discussing the case, as well as surveillance camera footage showing Thomas purchasing ammunition. Additionally, Thomas's half-brother Nathan confirmed Alice's involvement in the crime. Nathan Hand reached a plea deal to shorten his sentence by pleading guilty to manslaughter in exchange for helping to solve the case, resulting in a 9-year prison sentence. The defense attempted to exonerate Alice, acknowledging her hostility toward Daniel. They argued that the situation was an act of self-defense, claiming that Alice had endured domestic violence for 6 months. They asserted that Alice, a victim of violence as a child, was determined to prevent her daughter from experiencing the same, which explained her strong opposition to sharing custody with Daniel. After deliberations, the jury unanimously convicted Alice Trappler of premeditated murder. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Throughout the trial, she remained calm, showing no remorse or emotion. Alice expressed dissatisfaction with her 25-year prison sentence and filed several appeals, all of which were rejected. 2 days before Christmas in the peaceful town of Ellington, Connecticut, Birchview Drive was adorned with holiday decorations and wrapped gifts, creating a serene atmosphere. However, that calm was abruptly interrupted when a house alarm started ringing, prompting the police to respond quickly. When they arrived, they discovered smoke, a man bound to a chair, and something alarming in the basement. Initially, it appeared to be a burglary, but as detectives began their investigation, inconsistencies emerged. Eventually, a seemingly ordinary fitness tracker would uncover a shocking truth that no one anticipated. Connie DeBate, born on July 31, 1976, in Rockville, Connecticut, Connie was loved by all who knew her. She was raised by her parents, Kenneth and Cindy Stewart Margada, alongside her siblings Marlise, Leslie, and Keith. Connie's childhood in the peaceful towns of Vernon and Ellington was filled with deep friendships. After graduating from Ellington High in 1995, she attended the University of Connecticut and earned her degree in 1999. Connie went on to have a successful career in pharmaceutical sales in Reckitt Benckiser. Her friends remember her as kind, selfless, and vibrant, someone who brightened every room she entered. In the early 2000s, Connie met Richard DeBate, who born just 2 days before her on July 29, 1976. Richard was charming and motivated, with a background in computer network administration. They fell in love and got married on July 4, 2003. Soon after, they welcomed 2 sons, Richard R.J. and Connor. They then moved into a lovely home on Birchview Drive in Ellington. To outsiders, they appeared to be a perfect family. Connie was a caring mother, and Richard seemed to be a devoted husband. However, the reality behind closed doors was starting to show signs of trouble. On December 23, 2015, just 2 days before Christmas, a tragic event occurred. The day started like any other. At 8:10 a.m., Richard dropped the boys off at the bus stop while Connie was getting ready for a class at the local gym. Shortly after she left, Richard realized he had forgotten his work laptop and went back home. He reported that this was the moment everything changed. Richard told the police that he received a security alert on his phone about an alarm going off at their house. He emailed his boss to explain his delay and quickly returned home. When he got inside, he claimed he heard noises coming from upstairs. As he went to check, he said he encountered a masked intruder in camouflage who was holding a knife. According to Richard, chaos erupted when a man entered their home demanding money and passwords, threatening to harm his family. Just then, the garage door opened. Connie had returned early because her class was canceled. Richard shouted a warning, but the intruder ran toward Connie, leading to a struggle. Richard was thrown down the stairs and became dazed. When he regained his senses and went after them into the basement, it was already too late. He heard the gunshot. The attacker then turned on Richard, tied him to a folding chair with zip tied, cut him with a box cutter. However, Richard managed to fight back, frightened the man away. The story was dramatic, but the timeline raised some questions. Richard reported that the attack occurred around 9:05 a.m., but the first 911 call was made over an hour later, at 10:21. When first responders arrived, they noticed smoke in the air and the front door slightly ajar. They followed a trail of blood from the basement to the kitchen, where they discovered Richard, partially restrained and lying face down. However, there was no evidence of the supposed intruder. Investigators conducted a thorough search of the home, taking photographs of everything, including Richard still tied to the chair. As they examined the scene more closely, they found themselves with increasing questions. Initially, it appeared to be the aftermath of a violent struggle, but some details were inconsistent. Richard had zip tied only on his left wrist and ankle, his injuries were minimal, and the location of his wound raised suspicions. Meanwhile, the real tragedy unfolded in the basement boiler room, where police discovered Connie. She had sustained 2 fatal gunshot wounds, one to her abdomen and another to the back of her head. Unfortunately, there was no hope for her. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators quickly recognized that this was not just a standard home invasion case. They dispatched service dog units to try to track the intruder. Surprisingly, the dogs focused their attention on one individual, Richard. One of the dogs discovered Richard's wallet in the yard, which had likely been discarded by the escaping intruder. However, there was no scent trail leading away from the house. Instead, the dogs followed a path directly to the ambulance where Richard was being treated for what turned out to be only minor injuries. From that moment on, Richard's story started to fall apart. At Hartford Hospital, detectives questioned him about what happened that morning. Richard stuck to his story that an intruder shot Connie, but when they asked for more details, his account started to change. His timeline became unclear. At one point, Richard said he left the house before Connie, but later he couldn't remember who left first. He also altered his description of returning home. Initially, he claimed he heard no sounds upstairs, but then he said he went upstairs after seeing a bedroom light and found a man going through a closet. There were several inconsistencies in Richard's account. Initially, he stated that he was pushed down the stairs, but later changed his story to say he fell. He described a struggle between Connie and the intruder over a gun, claiming the intruder overpowered her and shot her. Richard also claimed that the basement was completely dark, making it difficult to see. However, if he had been knocked unconscious as he stated, how could he remember so many details? Additionally, the physical evidence did not support Richard's story. He claimed he crawled up the stairs while still tied to a chair to call for help, but his injuries were only on the left side and the front of his legs, areas that were easily accessible with his right hand. There was another issue to consider. There was hardly any blood trail leading from the basement to the kitchen. Investigators found only a few dry drops of blood in the kitchen, which raised questions. If Richard had truly dragged himself upstairs, he would have left a more obvious trail. Even more concerning was what they didn't discover. There was no evidence that Richard had approached Connie's body after the shooting. The blood around her remained undisturbed, suggesting that no one attempted to assist her. Detectives also looked at the supposed entry point, a basement window, which showed no signs of forced entry. Instead, the locks were found removed from the inside and placed on the sill. For someone to enter in that manner, they would need to pry open the window without damaging the frame or triggering the alarm system, which seemed unlikely. When asked more questions, Richard described his marriage as mostly positive. He acknowledged that Connie had been going through emotional challenges, showing signs of depression and occasional anger, which was unusual for her since she is generally warm and optimistic. He indicated that she was gradually improving. However, when asked if investigators would find any relationship problems, Richard provided a confusing answer, saying both yes and no. Richard explained that he and Connie both wanted another child, but medical issues had prevented them from conceiving again. As detectives investigated further, Richard shared surprising information. He revealed that he and Connie had made a plan for him to have a child with another woman. Richard claimed that artificial insemination was too costly, so they opted for a more personal arrangement. He mentioned that it was Connie's idea for the three of them, Richard, Connie, and the woman, to co-parent the child. To Richard, this seemed like a modern way to achieve their shared dream. However, investigators found his story puzzling. When detectives asked Richard whether Connie was aware of the woman's pregnancy, he avoided answering the question. Then, a crucial discovery was made: Connie and the woman had never actually met. This fact fundamentally weakened Richard's story. As more details emerged, the reality became clearer. Connie hadn't agreed to anything, and the woman's pregnancy was unplanned. It turned out Richard was hiding much more than just an affair. Later that day, investigators found this woman, and her account changed everything. She acknowledged knowing Richard was married but believed he was in the process of getting a divorce. Richard had told her that his marriage was over, that he and Connie were just waiting for the right moment to separate. On June 18, 2015, the woman found out she was pregnant. She chose to inform Richard. He responded with a false claim that he had already hired a divorce lawyer. By December, their relationship was still strong, and they were even planning a romantic getaway to Vermont just a week before Connie's death. During that trip, they discussed when to reveal their relationship, and Richard suggested they wait until after Christmas to do so. When the investigation focused on those close to Connie, a different story emerged. Her friends, the ones she usually confided in, had no idea about Richard's lover, the child, or the alleged agreement Richard claimed they had made. They insisted that if Connie had known about these things, she would have shared that information with them, as she always did. Richard privately shared his feelings with close friends, revealing that he loved his lover but was worried about losing Connie. However, the love triangle he was trying to keep hidden was on the verge of being exposed. Investigators had suspected from the outset that Richard might be linked to his wife's murder, although they kept their doubts to themselves. Publicly, it was believed that a masked intruder had broken into their home, killed Connie, and left Richard injured. Friends and neighbors sympathized with Richard, initially accepting his displayed grief without question, but investigators continued to pursue leads. One potential suspect was a contractor whom Connie and Richard had taken to small claims court over a dispute regarding home renovations. Connie had reportedly been fearful of this contractor, and her car had been vandalized twice in 2015, incidents she suspected were related to him. As a precaution, they had improved their home security system and acquired firearms. Throughout the investigation, the contractor's name frequently surfaced in interviews as a significant lead, but it soon became clear that he had a strong alibi for the day of the murder and did not match the description of the masked figure Richard provided. That lead quickly went cold. As investigators focused on Richard, others noticed his unusual behavior. His response to Connie's death was not typical for a grieving husband. He seemed off, his account of events kept changing, and his expressions of sorrow seemed insincere. The facade of a perfect family was already broken, and now the reality behind it was starting to emerge, revealing one contradiction and one deception at a time. In the days after Connie's tragic death, Richard's actions puzzled those around him. One of his first posts on a neighborhood forum was a seemingly casual question: "What's the best place for takeout?" This seemed shocking for someone whose wife had just been murdered. However, as investigators looked more closely into the couple's lives, deeper issues emerged. They were facing significant financial difficulties, spending much more than they earned, with much of the strain falling on Connie. She had shared with a friend her thoughts about leaving Richard and had even saved a private note on her phone titled "Reasons I Want to Divorce," where she documented Richard's dishonesty, emotional neglect, inadequate parenting, and selfish behavior. Investigators soon discovered a money trail. They found 2 life insurance policies, each valued at nearly $500,000. Although Richard's policy had expired because he didn't make payments, Connie's policy was still active. Remarkably, Richard filed a claim just 5 days after her death. A month later, he received another $75,000 from her employer. This shocking discovery revealed that the man who professed to be mourning her was already profiting from her death. Over the next year, detectives meticulously built Connie's case. They analyzed phone records, financial statements, emails, and security logs. The key breakthrough came from something often overlooked: Connie's Fitbit. The data was incriminating. The fitness tracker indicated she was alive and active long after Richard claimed she had been killed. On December 23, she woke up at 7:52 a.m. Her activity paused while she drove to the gym, which was confirmed by surveillance footage. She returned home around 9:20 a.m., and from 9:37 to 9:43, she was inactive, likely resting. After that, her tracker recorded movement, even social media activity from her phone. At 10:05 a.m., her Fitbit showed its last recorded movement, while Richard had stated she died around 9:05. This data clearly proved she was still alive an hour later, and it was the kind of evidence that no alibi could dismiss. On April 14, 2017, police arrested Richard DeBate, charging him with the murder of Connie, tampering with evidence, and making false statements. Although Richard pleaded not guilty, his arrest shocked the community in Ellington. To many, he appeared to be a grieving husband rather than a murderer. Prosecutors put together a 50-page affidavit detailing the case against him, which included his extramarital affair, insurance money, inconsistencies in his story, and the Fitbit data that contradicted his account of events. However, the justice process was slow. The case experienced 2 delays, and it wasn't until April 5, 2022, almost 6.5 years later, that the trial finally commenced. When it did, the courtroom was filled with people, including 600 exhibits and 130 witnesses. Connie's story had gained national attention and was often referred to as the Fitbit murder. The defense aimed to create uncertainty concerning the case. They highlighted the presence of unidentified DNA found in multiple areas of the house, suggesting that another person may have been there. They also pointed out that the amount of gunshot residue on Richard was minimal, arguing that it was too low for someone who had just fired a gun. However, the prosecution firmly countered these claims. They asserted that the DNA evidence did not indicate another suspect but served to divert attention from the main issue. Regarding the gunshot residue, they explained that the test was conducted several hours later, allowing Richard the opportunity to wash his hands, clean up, and potentially tamper with the scene. The prosecution maintained that Richard had a clear motive. He was under pressure, his lover was pregnant, Connie wanted to leave, and Richard's seemingly perfect life was about to unravel. The pressure is mounting. The baby is coming, and the defendant's worst fears are about to be realized. After a 5-week trial, the jury took only 3 hours to reach their verdict. On May 10, 2022, Richard DeBate, 46, was found guilty on all charges. During the sentencing, the judge was straightforward. She described the crime as premeditated, heinous, and incomprehensible, sentencing him to 65 years, just 1 year short of the maximum possible sentence. He is currently housed at McDougall Walker Prison in Suffield, Connecticut. For Connie's family, the long ordeal is finally over. The judge took a moment to remember Connie, not just as a victim, but as a vibrant woman, a loving mother, and a devoted friend. With justice now served, Connie's story will always be remembered. Richard maintains his innocence to this day, and his lawyers continue to appeal his conviction. As recently as October 2024, local NBC Connecticut reported that Richard's lawyers argued their client did not receive a fair trial, citing questions posed by the state prosecutor, including inquiries that asked Richard to respond to the testimonies of other witnesses. However, Richard remains behind bars, convicted of murdering his wife to cover up an affair. He is not scheduled for release until 2087, although his lawyers continue to pursue appeals to try to shorten his sentence. No decision has been made regarding Richard's appeal from October 2024, which could potentially review his conviction and sentence. The Connecticut Supreme Court upheld the conviction on March 11, 2025. Marilena Rosari was a 58-year-old woman living with her husband in Castellanza, Italy. They had 2 grown daughters who lived on their own and had children of their own, making Marilena a grandmother. She worked as a promoter in supermarkets located in the province of Varese. By 2017, she viewed herself as a successful individual, enjoying a peaceful life while taking care of her family. On Sunday, July 30, 2017, Marilena and her husband visited a mutual friend's house for dinner in a nearby town. They spent a few hours there before returning home together to Castellanza. It was a typical quiet evening for them. However, once they arrived home, her husband had other plans. He planned to visit his elderly mother in the nearby town, as she was unwell and needed help with housework. He was absent all evening and night, returning home the next morning around 10:30 a.m. He expected to find his wife at home since she usually left for work later. Typically, at that time, she would be enjoying her morning routine, having breakfast, getting ready, and occasionally doing some cleaning. To his surprise, Marilena was missing. Initially, her husband thought she might have gone to work earlier than usual, possibly due to a last-minute request. However, Marilena always communicated any changes to her schedule and would not just disappear without notice. Moreover, that morning, she had planned to spend time with him to discuss their future plans and some important matters. He started to feel anxious and tried to reach Marilena. After several unsuccessful attempts to call her mobile phone, he noticed it was turned off, which was unusual for her as she was always reachable during work hours. When he checked the house, he discovered more worrying signs. Her bag containing personal items and documents was missing, but her car was parked in the yard. This was strange since she never left without her car. Concerned, he went outside to look around the neighborhood. He talked to several neighbors who were awake and working in their gardens, but none of them had seen or heard anything unusual. He also called his daughters, but they had not heard from their mother either. Marilena's phone still remained off. Feeling restless, he decided to contact the police. However, they informed him that they could not file a missing person report until 24 hours had passed. It was not until July 31st, when he returned to the police station, that his report was finally accepted and the search began. During this time, he couldn't get in touch with Marilena. He reached out to everyone who knew her, including her daughters, relatives, and colleagues, but no one had seen her. By the time the police acknowledged the report of her disappearance, the management and staff at the supermarkets were already worried because she hadn't shown up for work in 2 days. Marilena was known for her punctuality and reliability. She never missed a shift, so her absence raised great concern. The police interviewed all of Marilena's co-workers. They were shocked by her disappearance and found no indications that anything was wrong. No one was aware of any issues she might have been dealing with, nor did it seem like she had plans for a long trip or any reason to leave unexpectedly. The last person to see and talk to Marilena was her husband, making him the first person law enforcement wanted to question. Detectives interviewed him multiple times to understand what happened before her disappearance. They aimed to find out if the couple had any issues that might have led Marilena to leave or if anyone harbored ill will toward her. Her husband found these suggestions ridiculous and dismissed them, stating that their family had never been involved in crime or shady activities, and they did not have any enemies. Detectives interviewed Marilena's friends and found that they had no useful information. Her husband mentioned one concerning detail: the family was facing financial troubles, owing €10,000 to the bank. However, this lead seemed unhelpful since they were consistently making payments on the loan. He also provided documentation proving that both he and Marilena were fulfilling their financial obligations without issues. The police explored various possibilities, ranging from a voluntary disappearance to a potential crime, but after several days, they had no concrete answers. Meanwhile, Marilena had not used her phone or bank cards, raising concerns about her well-being, as it's difficult for anyone to survive long without money, a phone, or a car. A press conference was held to gather more information about Marilena's disappearance, and a television appeal was broadcasted to raise awareness. The prosecutor's office requested a detailed description of the missing woman, which was shared on all channels along with a call for eyewitnesses to come forward. Unfortunately, this effort did not lead to any new information. To assist with the search, specially trained dogs were brought in. The dogs were taken around the house and the area by the gate, but they remained calm and did not indicate any scent. The courtyard and Marilena's car were also searched without any success. Additionally, Marilena's relatives appeared on television, made several public statements, and directly reached out to her in hopes of getting a response. Days went by, but Marilena was still missing. The critical timeframe for finding her alive had passed, and anxiety deepened as troubling thoughts arose. Her husband and daughters felt increasingly worried. Law enforcement still issued a nationwide appeal through various media to widen the search efforts. Meanwhile, relatives created and distributed flyers featuring Marilena's photo throughout the city. A week later, the police had almost lost hope of finding her alive and shifted their focus to the surrounding area, trying to identify anyone who might have been involved in her possible murder or kidnapping. Naturally, close relatives, especially her husband, became suspects. He was the last known person to have spent time with her. He claimed he was at his mother's house during the time she went missing, which raised suspicions. After appearing on television, he acted cautiously, seemingly avoiding drawing attention to himself. He explained this behavior by saying he wanted to evade media scrutiny, but law enforcement grew suspicious that there might be a more concerning reason behind his actions. Consequently, they began to investigate him more thoroughly. Detectives confirmed that the evening after her husband brought her home, he went to help his sick mother with housework. Neighbors saw them arrive together, and several witnesses confirmed that he left almost immediately afterward. He was not seen again until the next morning. Neighbors near his mother's house also supported his story, stating he arrived late in the evening, and the timing matched perfectly. CCTV cameras along the road recorded his car traveling to and from his mother's house at the times he mentioned. His alibi appeared solid and did not raise any suspicions. However, investigators were not quick to remove him from the list of suspects, as close acquaintances are often implicated in such cases. Therefore, they returned to that neighborhood hoping to gather more information from former neighbors. Local residents were interviewed, and detectives meticulously investigated Marilena's previous social circle to find any suspicious individuals who might have had an interest in the kidnapping or potential violent actions. At this stage, her husband appeared to be an unlikely suspect for several reasons. He and his wife were widely regarded as loving partners with minimal disagreements. He had no financial incentive to cause her harm, and he had a solid alibi. Meanwhile, the investigation continued to progress as new leads surfaced. After speaking with the couple's acquaintances at their former residence, the Carabinieri shifted their focus to Vito Clerico, a 64-year-old man who was well acquainted with Marilena and her husband, lived nearby. From the outset, Vito displayed a cautious demeanor and seemed anxious. During questioning, he changed his story multiple times, which raised significant suspicions. The investigation team focused on Marilena's neighbor to gather more information. Background checks revealed that he had no criminal record, and his relationship with Marilena did not initially cause any concerns. A mutual friend mentioned that they met at work when Marilena was a promoter at shopping centers. This was Vito working as a storekeeper at Marilena's workplace. Their jobs frequently brought them together, leading to regular communication. The friend described Vito as irresponsible, noting that he had a history of borrowing large amounts of money from others and either not repaying it or repaying it late. There were also rumors that Marilena had lent him money during their time together, which could suggest a possible motive for the crime. As a result, he was called in for questioning. During the interview at the station, Vito described receiving a call from Marilena on the night she disappeared. She asked to meet him at the station in Garbagnac Milanese, explaining that her husband was visiting his sick mother and could not assist her. She mentioned having important business in the city. Vito, being friends with her, agreed to meet, but Marilena never showed up. Initially, he thought she changed her mind and went home. However, several aspects of his story seemed suspicious. First, the timing was too late for any business dealings. Second, the timeline Vito provided did not align with the information the police had confirmed. According to the timeline, Marilena should have been preparing to go to the station while she was with her friends, but no one confirmed that she had any plans to go anywhere or contacted anyone. Additionally, since her husband was nearby, she could have asked him for help. All of this seemed illogical. Due to these inconsistencies, detectives decided to investigate Vito's account further. They discovered that his mobile phone was never registered on the route he claimed to have taken. Furthermore, he was not seen on any surveillance cameras, including those at the station. If Vito was telling the truth, he should have appeared on video. The most intriguing discovery was that the detectives found a woman in the recordings who looked like Marilena. This indicated that she had indeed visited Garbagnac Milanese, from which she never returned. Upon examining Vito's mobile phone, the detectives confirmed that he had received several calls in the days leading up to her disappearance. Marilena had repeatedly tried to contact him, but he had consistently ignored her. However, on the night she disappeared, there was no call from her to him. Instead, there was a single outgoing call from Vito to her number on the evening of July 30th, 2017. This evidence directly contradicted his account of events. During the conversation, one of the detectives spotted dark red stains on Vito's trousers that looked like blood. Vito quickly claimed that he raised rabbits and that the stains might have come from butchering one of them, as he owned around 40 rabbits. However, the police doubted his story, confiscated the trousers, and sent them to a lab for testing. The analysis confirmed that the stains were human blood, specifically matching that of Marilena. Vito was unable to explain this finding. On September 11, 2017, he was arrested, 40 days after Marilena had disappeared. He was charged with murder and concealing her body. During interrogations, Vito provided confusing and inconsistent accounts that varied from day to day, filled with odd details, but he did not provide any clear confessions or truth. Eventually, he was worn down and agreed to tell investigators where Marilena's body, while still denying that he was the murderer. He claimed he helped the real killer hide her body out of fear for himself and his wife. Vito was compelled to assist in disposing of a body, and he kept the identity of Marilena's killer a secret. On September 12, authorities began excavating his backyard, specifically in a small garden in Garbagnac Milanese. At the exact spot Vito indicated, they found a shallow grave approximately 40 centimeters deep. Inside, they discovered a decapitated body wrapped in multiple layers of polyethylene and placed in a bag, which was partially covered in concrete. The advanced decomposition of the remains and the missing head complicated the identification process. Although the clothing resembled Marilena's, there were no identifying features, like tattoos, scars, or fractures, to confirm her identity. As a result, identification needed to be made using dental records. In the meantime, police continued to search for the missing head. Vito, for unknown reasons, refused to cooperate with law enforcement. His behavior was quite unusual, leading them to suspect he might be feigning mental disorders to claim insanity during the trial and evade punishment for the murder. It was revealed that he had been diagnosed with minor mental health issues in the past and had taken medication, but he had recently stopped. Eventually, under pressure from detectives, Vito started talking again. He claimed that he not only helped hide Marilena's body but also beheaded her after the murder. He said a certain killer had ordered him to do this. The decapitation was a deliberate act to make identification more difficult. Vito stated that he had thrown the head in a dumpster. Given how much time had passed, it was likely that the head had already been taken to a dump outside the city, making it nearly impossible to find. However, the authorities were skeptical. Every claim he made needed to be verified. While interrogating Vito, the police also spoke with his family members. One of them mentioned that Vito owned several plots of land. He recalled seeing Vito heading toward one of the most remote plots the day after Marilena's disappearance. This plot was an abandoned field located between Garbagnac Milanese and the town where Marilena lived. The suspect owned property there but typically did not visit without a valid reason. The family members speculated that Vito might have gone to this isolated area to dispose of Marilena's head. Before beginning their search for the head, the police rechecked Vito's mobile phone. This allowed them to confirm that he had indeed traveled to that location, helping to narrow down the search area. A large search team was organized, which included specially trained dogs. The task was made more difficult by the thick growth of blackberries in most of the area. The team thoroughly searched the abandoned field. A few hundred meters from the road, they found a bag hidden in the bushes. It was the same bag that Marilena usually took with her for errands and shopping. Inside the bag was Marilena's head. On September 26th, the body was finally confirmed to be that of Marilena Ree, a 58-year-old woman who had been missing. However, one question still lingered: what was the motive behind her murder? It is believed that it was likely connected to financial issues. Investigators discovered that in 2014, Marilena had loaned Vito and his wife a significant amount of money, approximately €80,000, from her savings. Vito had persuaded a mutual acquaintance that he and his wife were struggling with the bank due to overdue loans and were at risk of losing their home. Trusting his word, Marilena lent him the money, believing he was honest. In the following years, Vito repeatedly delayed paying back the debt, relying on Marilena's patience and her lack of urgent financial needs. However, Marilena eventually needed the money and requested a quick repayment. When Vito failed to return the funds, she had to take out a bank loan, planning to pay it off as soon as she received her repayment from Vito. Despite her growing insistence on getting her money back, Vito still did not repay the debt. On that significant evening, after her husband went to visit his mother, Marilena likely chose to confront Vito about the money. It is unclear how she ended up in the nearby city. During their discussion, Vito refused to return the money, which prompted a violent reaction from Marilena. This led to a conflict that escalated into a fight. A forensic expert noted that before Marilena was beheaded, she was hit on the head with a blunt object at least 6 times. The specifics are hard to determine due to multiple fractures in her skull and facial bones. Additionally, the remains had deteriorated significantly, complicating the examination further. After the murder, Vito cut off his victim's head, buried the body in a shallow grave near his house, wrapped it in several layers of plastic, and partially covered it with concrete. He had only a small amount of building materials, which was insufficient to fully hide the burial site. He placed the head inside her bag, took it out of town, and threw it deep into the thorny bushes on his remote property, hoping it would never be discovered. Even though the reconstruction of the events was supported by various pieces of evidence, Vito did not confess to the crime. Searches of his house and car found traces of blood and indirect evidence suggesting that he was not alone in committing the crime. Unfortunately, not all details could be uncovered. Vito completely denied any involvement of his wife or anyone else, claiming that a third party was responsible but refusing to identify them. After several interrogations, he ultimately took the blame for the crime. Vito's defense attorney claimed that his confession was coerced, noting that he had been questioned at least 10 times and believed his rights were violated. Initially, he only admitted to hiding the remains but did not confess to murder. However, he later claimed to have killed Marilena. Eventually, his story changed again, and he denied everything. The lawyer suggested that someone else must have committed the crime, indicating the possible involvement of a third party. However, this theory could not be supported by witnesses or the evidence gathered. Without any solid leads on the identity of this mysterious person, the idea was dismissed. All of Vito's inconsistent statements, which raised suspicions among investigators, were attributed to an effort to protect his wife. The next step focused on Vito's mental state. Psychiatric evaluations were performed, which found no significant issues. The prosecution claimed that the concealed body, beheading, and the discarded bag far from the city pointed to premeditated murder, a well-planned crime. It was clear that the defendant had intentionally lured the victim into a trap. However, despite the strong arguments and evidence, Vito cleverly kept altering his story, apparently aiming to confuse the investigation. In a desperate attempt to defend himself, Vito tried to argue that the prosecution was biased against him. His lawyer suggested this was to make him a scapegoat and resolve the case quickly. The accused also mentioned having amnesia, which he said prevented him from remembering the days surrounding Marilena's murder. He ultimately confessed to hearing voices of demons that had tormented him for years, leading him to kill Marilena. However, these claims were disproven through investigations, and multiple witnesses stated they had never seen him exhibit signs of mental illness. Throughout the investigation, Vito remained calm and did not show signs of significant stress, which is uncommon for someone with mental health issues. The only medical condition identified in him was epilepsy, but he experienced seizures very rarely. Even if they happened more frequently, aggressive behavior is not typical for those with epilepsy. Detectives were intrigued by Vito's desperate attempts to shift the focus away from his wife. From the start, she appeared to be a potential accomplice in the murder. Investigators viewed her as more dominant and assertive than Vito, leading them to suspect she might have been the mastermind behind the crime. As they dug deeper, they uncovered more compelling information. Marilena was not the only woman deceived by Vito. He frequently borrowed large amounts of money from relatives, friends, and colleagues, ranging from 30,000 to 100,000 euros, to finance the construction of his house. This project became an obsession for both Vito and his wife, who had long dreamed of building a grand villa. To achieve their goal, they took on significant debts and loans, often borrowing again just to make payments and delay the associated issues of non-payment. By the time Marilena was murdered, they were under immense pressure from creditors. It is likely that everyone who lent them money was in danger, just as Marilena was. Due to the extensive examinations needed for a thorough investigation of the deceased's body, the burial did not take place until 10 months after the body was found. The funeral was held on June 1, 2018. By the end of January 2019, the trial of Vito began. From the start, his inconsistent statements, confessions, and retractions created a sense of distrust. The defense attorney struggled to effectively counter the prosecution's arguments, achieving only limited success in reducing the charges. Initially, it was thought that the murder involved torture, but a forensic expert later confirmed that the severed head and some of the body mutilations occurred after death. On January 24, 2019, Vito, who is 66 years old, was sentenced to life imprisonment. He appealed the verdict, but his appeal was rejected. Investigations into his wife's possible involvement in Marilena's death are still ongoing. On November 21, 2017, Vito was attacked in prison by his cellmate. His cellmate used a metal plate and a makeshift weapon during the assault. Vito reported that he had tried to stop all communication with his cellmate, who had made clear abuse advances that escalated into harassment. When Vito threatened to report his cellmate's behavior, he was attacked. While in prison, Vito continually expressed his dissatisfaction with the justice system, insisting on his innocence and asking for safety from his hostile cellmate. Despite his requests, he was sent back to prison after receiving treatment. On Sunday, November 29, 2020, he was found dead in the prison toilet. In his hand was a note that powerfully criticized the Italian law enforcement. He died after swallowing a garbage bag, which obstructed his airway and led to suffocation. Many suspect that he did not take his own life and that the incident was planned by his cellmate. On the morning of May 17, 2005, a 911 call came from a quiet home in Alexandria, Kentucky. A woman was screaming, claiming that someone had broken in and shot her husband. When the police arrived, they found the house in chaos. Drawers were pulled open, items were scattered everywhere, and broken glass covered the floor. In the bedroom, they discovered a man's body. Initially, it appeared to be a botched robbery, but something felt off about the situation. The children provided different accounts of the event, raising suspicion. Then, the police uncovered a crucial piece of evidence hidden deep inside the washing machine that changed the investigation. What truly happened in the Bosley home that morning? Robert Bob Bosley was born on August 6, 1962, in the small town of Alexandria, Kentucky. He grew up in a close-knit, religious family with his siblings. From an early age, Bob demonstrated a sharp intellect and a strong ambition. Although much of his early life is not well documented, it is clear that he started planning his future before he even became an adult. Bob dreamed of becoming wealthy and owning his own business. He began by offering chimney cleaning and minor roof repairs. With long hours, affordable rates, and a strong work ethic, he gained a reputation as a reliable and friendly worker. His hard work paid off. Eventually, Bob expanded his one-man operation into a successful business, Bosley Roofing and Chimney Sweep in Alexandria. Under his management, the company became known for its quality and reliability, attracting loyal customers and generating impressive profits. With a growing influx of money, Bob aimed for even greater success. He started buying rental properties, eventually owned about 20. These investments significantly increased his income, making him one of the most successful businessmen in the area. His newfound wealth allowed him to enjoy a lavish lifestyle, complete with sports cars, horses, an airplane, a large boat, and a collection of expensive firearms. His boat, frequently spotted on Lake Cumberland, became known for hosting wild adult parties filled with alcohol, music, and scantily dressed attendees. Bob met 18-year-old Amy at one of his favorite local restaurants. Amy, also from Alexandria, grew up in a working-class family and faced financial challenges, especially due to her father's struggles with alcohol. Despite these difficulties, she was determined to create a better life for herself. After graduating high school with top honors in 1986, Amy enrolled in business studies at a community college affiliated with Northern Kentucky University. To support her education, she worked as a waitress, where she met Bob. He was older, wealthy, and charming. Initially shy, Amy soon became captivated by his lifestyle. She began attending his infamous lake parties and quickly became a close friend of his. Eventually, Amy won Bob's heart. After 4 years of dating, they got married. This was a major change for Amy, who had transformed from her modest beginnings to marrying one of the most eligible bachelors in the area. They then started a family, welcoming their daughter Morgan in 1996 and their son Trevor 3 years later. Amy transitioned from her carefree party days to fully embrace her new role as a dedicated mother, swapping late nights at the lake for school events and parenting responsibilities. Bob was expanding his business and investments, but he found one aspect particularly frustrating: administration. Managing payroll, taxes, invoices, and contractors felt burdensome to him. He preferred spending time by the lake rather than being stuck in an office. On weekends, he often disappeared on his boat for days at a time, keeping his location a secret. Friends later noted that Bob seemed to be distancing himself from his family, becoming more involved in a life of indulgence, secrecy. Since Amy had a background in business administration, he asked her to take over the company's financial and administrative tasks. Initially, she was hesitant, but she eventually agreed. From that point on, Amy took charge of managing the company's finances, payroll, and tax responsibilities. The Bosleys seemed to be doing exceptionally well, living in a charming log cabin in the woods south of Alexandria while their dream home was being built close by. This future home was impressive, featuring 14 acres, stained glass windows, a stone tower, and Gothic gargoyles. To everyone else, the Bosleys represented the American dream. They were good-looking, successful, generous with their time, actively involved in their church and their children's school. Bob was known for donating services to low-income families, earning respect throughout the community. However, beneath this fairy tale facade lay a troubling reality. As the administrator, Amy had access to the company's complete financial situation. While Bob focused on expanding the business, the lake, and building their dream home, Amy secretly started redirecting company funds. Instead of paying taxes, she funneled the money into a personal account that was hidden from view. For years, this embezzlement went unnoticed, but the IRS eventually caught on. They sent multiple letters, made phone calls, and tried to schedule meetings, but Bob never received any of these communications. Amy had ensured that all IRS correspondence was sent to a private mailbox she controlled, fully aware that the government was closing in but thinking she could delay things indefinitely. On the morning of Tuesday, May 17, 2005, just days before their 15th wedding anniversary, everything changed. Around 5 a.m., Amy Bosley made a frantic 911 call. Her panicked voice filled the line until the call was abruptly interrupted by a loud crash. The dispatchers attempted to reconnect. Shortly after, law enforcement rushed to the Bosley cabin. When they arrived, they found Amy in shock, holding her children. Her sister soon arrived to take care of the kids while Amy was taken in for questioning. Police secured the area and contacted the crime scene unit. As daylight broke, more officers arrived to search the nearby forest with K-9 units and a helicopter, looking for what they suspected was a fleeing intruder. In the bedroom, they found Bob's lifeless body. He was kneeling beside the bed, leaning forward, and had multiple gunshot wounds. However, only 2 shell casings were found in the room, which added to the confusion. As detectives examined the evidence, they started to doubt the authenticity of the crime scene and the entire narrative surrounding it. Except for the children's rooms, the rest of the house was chaotic. Kitchen cabinets were left wide open, including those under the sink, which seemed odd for a thief to rummage through. A rear door had a broken window, indicating a potential entry point, but surprisingly, most of the broken glass was outside rather than inside. This inconsistency raised suspicions from the beginning. The disorder continued elsewhere in the house. In the bathroom, the mirrored cabinet was open, and prescription bottles were strewn across the floor. It appeared more like a staged mess than the result of a rushed intruder. According to Amy's 911 call, the alleged attacker had left quickly, so why was there such a mess? As crime scene investigators examined the house, detectives began interviewing Amy Bosley at the police station. She seemed shaken and at times distressed, but appeared confused, as if she was having trouble remembering the details of her story. Amy described the intruder as a white male with a nasal voice, bad breath, and a strong odor of urine. She claimed he burst in during the night. He attacked both her and Bob. She had 2 marks on her chest, which she said were from the assault. When detectives asked who might have wanted to harm Bob, Amy indicated that he wasn't very popular, suggesting he had a wild reputation that could have led to enemies among disgruntled employees. She specifically mentioned a contractor and longtime friend of Bob as someone with whom Bob had recently had a disagreement. However, the friend was quickly ruled out as a suspect. He had a solid alibi and was very upset about Bob's death. Panic spread throughout the Alexandria community as schools were closed for several days due to the fear of a killer at large. Residents struggled to accept that Bob, a kind and generous man known for his willingness to help others, had been brutally murdered in his own home. Meanwhile, detectives at the cabin searched for clues. They found only 2 shell casings near Bob's body, despite multiple gunshot wounds, prompting them to look in the basement. There, in the family's washing machine, they discovered wet clothing and, at the bottom, a folded cloth with 4 additional shell casings. It was puzzling. Why would a fleeing killer hide evidence in a washing machine inside the victim's home? Even more unusual was an aluminum baseball bat found nearby, showing fresh scratches and white residue. Further lab analysis would be necessary to understand its potential relevance. Amy has been released and can now reunite with her children, but new details are emerging. The crime scene looks suspiciously arranged. Valuables, including large amounts of cash, were left alone. Amy's emotional reaction seems insincere. She showed no tears or genuine sorrow. Investigators believe there may be hidden motives. Then, a significant development occurred. IRS staff visited the station after learning about Bob's death. They had been trying to reach him for months regarding an enormous unpaid tax bill of over $1.7 million. A meeting was set for the day Bob died. The IRS agents also revealed an odd detail. During a previous call, they had spoken to someone who claimed to be Bob, but the voice sounded strange, high-pitched and unnatural. They suspected it was a woman pretending to be a man, and that voice may have belonged to Amy. The motive is now clear. Amy, who was responsible for managing the company's finances, had embezzled millions of dollars by redirecting tax payments into her personal account. Bob, completely unaware of her actions, he will learn the truth as soon as the IRS is ready to confront him. To make matters worse, there were allegations of Bob's infidelities. His sister later told investigators that she overheard Amy say she would shoot Bob if he ever cheated on her or left her. At the time, it seemed like a joke, but it now felt like a serious threat. Despite the growing evidence against her, Amy Bosley continues to deny any involvement in her husband's murder. During her second interrogation, she insists that she loved Bob, even though their marriage had its issues. She acknowledges that they faced problems, as many couples do, but argues there was no reason for her to harm the father of her children. Investigators, however, have a different perspective. Ballistics tests confirm that all 6 bullets that hit Bob correspond to 6 casings found, 2 in the bedroom and 4 concealed in the washing machine. A crucial development in the investigation occurred when Morgan and Trevor Bosley, ages 9 and 6, were interviewed separately. Both children provided the same description of the events. They had gone to bed peacefully but were suddenly awakened by the sound of 6 gunshots, followed by the sound of glass breaking. In contrast, Amy reported that the glass broke first and then the shots rang out, indicating inconsistencies in her story. Additionally, the scratches on her chest, which she claimed were from a struggle with the intruder, raised suspicions. The marks were too symmetrical, resembling staged wounds rather than genuine defensive injuries. A closer look at her blouse revealed that it hadn't been torn during the supposed attack. Instead, it had been carefully cut with scissors and then ripped to make it look damaged. Less than 2 weeks after Bob was murdered, authorities arrested Amy Bosley and charged her with the crime. However, there was one critical piece of evidence still missing: the murder weapon. Eventually, the weapon was found, but the circumstances of its discovery are unclear. One account states that a pistol from Bob's gun collection was discovered hidden in Amy's handbag, behind a wardrobe. Another version suggests that the weapon was found later by Amy's sister, who had taken care of Amy's children and belongings that night. While going through Amy's purse, she allegedly found the gun and promptly informed a lawyer, who then turned it over to the police. Regardless of how it was obtained, ballistic testing confirmed that the gun matched the 6 shell casings found at the crime scene and in the laundry. Although the bullets recovered from Bob's body were too damaged to establish a direct match, the circumstantial evidence against Amy was substantial. As the trial opened, prosecutors presented a straightforward and damaging story. For years, Amy had secretly embezzled money from Bob's company by diverting tax payments to herself. She had managed to evade the IRS through mail redirection and deceit, but her luck had finally run out. On May 17, 2005, Bob was set to meet with IRS agents who were insisting on explanations. Amy understood what this meeting signified: being exposed, facing divorce, and possible prison time. In response, the once respected wife, mother, and community volunteer came up with a desperate plan. The night before her meeting with the IRS, Amy, with her children asleep nearby, quietly took one of Bob's guns. Some sources claim she sedated the children first. While Bob was asleep, she shot him. Although wounded, he woke up and tried to defend himself. Investigators noted the way he was injured suggested he lunged at her, unaware that she was the one holding the gun. In shock and bleeding, Bob was unable to overpower her. She attacked him again. By the end of the incident, Bob Bosley, who had built his wealth from nothing, and who had put his trust in Amy, was dead in the home they were planning to share. Amy, who once supported him, now faced charges for orchestrating his murder, not out of fear, but out of greed. Bob Bosley's carefully built life of luxury and respect crumbled in one night due to cold calculations. What was left was a broken family, a shocked community, and an unforgettable legacy of betrayal. She smashed the back glass door with a baseball bat, rifled through cabinets and drawers to create the illusion of a burglary. Next, she concealed 4 spent bullet casings wrapped in cloth at the bottom of the washing machine. To make her injuries look real, Amy lightly cut her chest with what appeared to be scissors and slashed her blouse to suggest a struggle. Finally, she concluded her act with a 911 call, her voice filled with panic and the scene meticulously staged. Forensic evidence presented a different perspective on the case. Laboratory tests showed that glass fragments found on the aluminum bat matched the pieces from the broken rear door. The bat, which Amy's children recognized as belonging to their family, had not been used by an intruder. Instead, it was used by Amy herself. The police found no footprints, vehicle tracks, or any signs of anyone fitting the description Amy gave. No one had entered or left the house that night. Investigators also uncovered details about the Bosleys' marriage. Amy believed Bob had cheated on her. Photos discovered in their safe, taken during wild parties at Lake Cumberland, revealed a secret lifestyle and confirmed at least one affair. While the emotional pain of betrayal was evident, the real motive ran much deeper. Amy had embezzled the large amount of money from Bob's company by skimming off funds and failing to pay taxes. She thought that by killing him, she could keep her secret safe. Without Bob, his assets could cover the debt, allowing her to keep the remaining funds. The defense argued that the bullet casings could have come from Bob's pockets after a trip to the shooting range, but the evidence against Amy continued to mount. Despite this, her lawyer pointed out that there were no eyewitnesses, no DNA evidence, and no clear connection between the bullet casings and the bullets found in Bob's body. This ambiguity provided a chance to influence the jury's decision. Fearing that Amy might be acquitted and wanting to protect the Bosley children from the trauma of testifying against their mother, the prosecutors offered a plea deal. This would allow Amy to avoid a trial, spare her children the emotional strain, and receive a lighter sentence. In return, she would admit her guilt without revealing what had happened to the stolen millions. On November 2, 2006, Amy Bosley appeared in a Campbell County courtroom wearing a green and white prison jumpsuit. Her expression was impossible to read. Before the sentencing took place, Bob's family spoke directly to her. His brother accused her of being a liar and a fraud, warning her that although she might gain her freedom one day, she would never escape the memories of her actions. He reminded her that every night, she would see Bob's face and remember the tears of his children who were left without a father. Bob's sister fixed her gaze on Amy and asked the haunting question that troubled them all: did he beg you to stop? The answer would never be known. Next, Bob's mother approached, heartbroken and shaking, as she read a letter expressing her grief for the final goodbye that never happened. Amy remained silent, looking down and wiping away her tears. The judge acknowledged the damage Amy had caused, not just to her husband, but also to her children, her community, and her own future. He sentenced her to 20 years in prison. According to Kentucky law, she would be eligible for parole after serving 85% of her sentence, which equated to 17 years in prison. On May 18, 2022, exactly 17 years after Bob was murdered, Amy Bosley, who was 54 at the time, was released from the Kentucky Correctional Institution for Women. Most news outlets barely covered her release, and her current whereabouts are unknown. Some speculate that she may be trying to find the millions of dollars she had embezzled. Bob is buried at St. Stephen Cemetery in Campbell County, Kentucky. He is remembered for his kindness, ambition, and dedication to his family, tragically killed by someone he trusted deeply. In retrospect, Amy's choices appear both tragic and irrational. She was not in financial distress, and her husband was not abusive. The IRS may have offered a solution to her financial issues, or if she sought revenge, a divorce could have made her wealthier and free. Instead, she opted for murder.